He didn't buy whiskey. He didn't buy supplies. He didn't speak to a single soul. Every Friday afternoon, Ethan Callahan rode his black Appaloosa down from the high country, tied her at the post near Larimer Creek, walked to the middle of the old wooden bridge, and stood there for exactly 20 minutes. Then he rode back up the mountain alone. For 3 years, nobody in Greystone asked why, until Clara Whitmore arrived. If this story already has your attention, subscribe to our channel, follow along until the very last word, and drop a comment right now telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Colorado Territory, summer 1882. Clara Whitmore arrived in Greystone on a Tuesday with a carpet bag, $11, and no plan beyond the letter. Folded in her coat pocket, a reply from a woman named Margaret Tolliver, offering room board and a small wage to any woman of reliable character willing to cook and clean. Clara had reliable character. She wasn't sure she had much else left. She'd come from Kansas, where 8 months of fever had taken her mother, her father, and her 16-year-old brother Thomas, in that order, each one worse than the last. She'd sold the claim to a neighbor for what she could get, climbed onto a westbound wagon, and told herself she wasn't running. She was choosing. There was a difference, and she held on to it. Margaret Tolliver met her at the door of the boarding house, looked her over. The way a woman looks at a horse she's considering buying, and said, "You cook." "I do." "Bake." "Yes, ma'am." "Early morning's a problem." "No, ma'am." Margaret studied her face for another moment. "You running from something?" Clara met her eyes straight. "No, running toward something. Haven't figured out what yet." Something shifted in Margaret's expression. Not warmth exactly, but a door opening a crack. "Room's yours. Week's trial." She stepped back to let Clara in. "Don't be late for breakfast." Clara wasn't late, not once. By Thursday, she had the kitchen organized to her liking. By Friday morning, the permanent boarder, a weathered old man named Gerald, who'd lived in the corner room since the building was new, told her it was the best biscuit he'd had in 11 years. 11 years exactly, Clara said, sliding another onto his plate. 11 years this past April, Gerald said without a hint of humor. "My wife made them better, but she's been gone 11 years. Clara looked at him. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He picked up the biscuit. "She'd have liked yours." It was, Clara thought, one of the kindest things anyone had said to her in a long time. She heard about Ethan Callahan that same Friday morning. Delphine Shorter came to drop off finished laundry. She was a compact woman in her 40s who did washing for half the town and knew everything about everybody as a direct result. She accepted the coffee Clara offered, sat herself down at the kitchen table without being asked, and started talking. "You'll see something this afternoon," Delphine said. "Around 2 o'clock. Mountain Cowboy rides down, stands at the bridge for 20 minutes, rides back up." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "Been doing it every Friday for 3 years. "Why?" Clara asked. "That," Delphine said, "is what nobody knows, or nobody's asked, which amounts to the same thing in a town this size." "Why hasn't anyone asked?" Delphine gave her a look. "Because you don't ask a man like Ethan Callahan why he does things. You just leave him to it." "What kind of man is he?" "Quiet, keeps cattle up on the ridge, good land, good water rights, better than most realize." Delphine sipped her coffee. "Handsome enough, if that matters to you. Lost someone years back. Woman named Anna. After that, he pulled himself up that mountain and mostly stayed there." She paused. "Except Fridays." Clara thought about a man who came down from the mountains once a week to stand on a bridge for 20 minutes. "What does he do up there?" she asked. "The rest of the week." "Runs his operation, alone mostly. Had hands, but they don't stay. Not because he's cruel, he isn't. Because he's—" Delphine searched for the word. "Sealed up. Like a jar nobody's opened in a long time." After Delphine left, Clara stood at the front window and thought about that. At 2 o'clock she looked out. He rode in exactly on time. Tall man, dark hat, black Appaloosa, moving at an easy walk like they had all the time in the world and no particular interest in being watched. He tied the horse at the post near the creek. He walked to the bridge. He took his position at the south railing, forearms down, and looked at the water. He was completely still. Clara watched him the whole 20 minutes. When he left riding back up the mountain trail without once looking toward the town, she realized she'd been holding her breath for the last 5 of them. The second Friday she watched from the porch. The third Friday she told herself she was going to the general store, which was in that direction, which was true, and she found herself slowing as she reached the near end of the bridge and stopping. Howe was 15 feet from her, close enough that she could see his face clearly for the first time. It wasn't closed exactly. It was private. The way certain rooms in a house are private. You know something important happens there. You know better than to open the door without being invited. She should have kept walking. "Excuse me," she said. He turned, not with a flinch, not startled, but slow and deliberate. The way a man turns when he already knew someone was there and was waiting to see what they'd do. His eyes were gray, not quite blue, committed to neither. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't mean to intrude." She didn't look away. "But I've been watching you come here for 3 weeks, and I need to ask, who are you waiting for?" The silence that followed was not the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind that meant something was being weighed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the water. "I'm not sure," he said. "That's a question I know how to answer." "That's all right," Clara said. "I'm not sure I know why I asked it." He didn't tell her to leave. She took that as something. "Clara Whitmore," she said. "I'm boarding with Margaret Tolliver. Been here about a month." "I know." She blinked. "You know, small town. Not an apology, just a fact." She almost smiled. She turned to look at the water beside him, not making herself at home, just standing near enough to be in the same conversation. "I lost my family," she said. She hadn't planned to say it, but something told her this man would understand the language of it better than most. "Kansas. My mother, father, and my brother. 8 months. I sold the claim and came west." He was quiet. "I'm not telling you for sympathy," she said. "I'm telling you because I know what it looks like standing somewhere because you can't figure out how to stop. Being in 2 times at once." Another silence. But something in it had moved. "Her name was Anna," he said. Clara went still. He kept his eyes on the water. His jaw was set in the way of a man holding himself together while saying something he hasn't said out loud before. "She crossed this bridge every Friday afternoon," he said. "Going to see her kin on the North Road. She always waved." He paused. "I used to sit in front of the feed merchant just to see her wave." Clara didn't fill the silence. "Some things you didn't cover with words. She died the winter of '79, Ethan said. "Fever, fast." He shifted his weight slightly. "First Friday after the funeral, I ended up here. I don't know why. I stood here and I thought about how she used to wave, and when I left, something in me felt like I'd done something I was supposed to do." He finally looked at her. "I kept coming back," he said. 3 years. And I'm not sure anymore if it's about her or if it's just something I do." "I think," Clara said quietly, "it's probably both." He considered that for a moment. Something in his face changed, not a smile, but the locked quality of it eased slightly, like pressure releasing behind a door. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. People don't generally talk to me." "Somebody should have," Clara said. "Sooner." He looked at her, a long, level look, and behind those gray eyes, something was doing quiet arithmetic. "I'll let you be," she said, and meant it this time. She turned to go. "Her name was Anna," he said, then stopped, shook his head slightly. "I already said that." "You did," Clara said. "It's all right to say it twice." He was quiet for a beat. Then, "My name is Ethan." She understood what the offer was. Understood it was more than it looked like. "Clara," she said. He nodded once, slow, like a man completing something that mattered. She walked back toward town. She didn't look back, but she felt him watching her go the whole way. The fourth Friday, he was already there when she arrived. Not at the railing at the near end of the bridge, standing where she'd first stopped to speak to him. waiting. It was the first time he'd changed anything. She walked toward him, and he fell into step beside her, and they took their usual place at the south railing, without discussion, as if it had always been this way. "I brought something," he said. He reached into his coat and produced a small cloth bundle. He set it on the railing between them and unwrapped it without ceremony. 2 pieces of cornbread wrapped in a clean kerchief. "Baked them this morning," he said. "I'm told you're a better cook than I am, but I figured you bring coffee to other people. Somebody ought to bring something to you." Clara looked at the cornbread, then at him. "Who told you I bring coffee to people?" she asked. "Delphine." Clara laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. "Of course she did." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something better, maybe something that hadn't been used in a while, and was remembering how. She took a piece of the cornbread. It was decent. Not as good as hers, but decent, and made with intention, and that counted for more. "You bake often?" she asked. "No," he said. "Hadn't in years. Anna used to—" He stopped, started again. "She used to say a man who couldn't feed himself had no business feeding cattle." Smart woman. "Yes," he said simply. "She was." They stood and ate corn and looked at the water, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind. The kind that only happens between people who've agreed without saying so that the other person can be trusted. "Prescott came to see me," Ethan said after a while. The name landed differently than she expected. She'd heard it only once before in passing, but something about the way Ethan said it made her attention sharpen. "Who is he?" she asked, though something in her already suspected. "Doyle Prescott. He's been buying land in the valley." Ethan's voice was level, careful. "He wants my ridge property. Water rights, specifically the main fork of the creek, runs through my land. Whoever controls it controls the water supply for the South Valley in a dry year." "And this year is dry," Clara said. "Driest in 10. He looked at the creek. "He came up last Tuesday. Said he wanted to make a fair offer. Said it twice, which is generally how you know an offer isn't fair." "What did you tell him?" "I told him no. Simple. Final. He left polite, which worries me more than if he'd left angry." Clara thought about the way Prescott had looked at the boarding house window the previous week. The way he and his man had laughed. "He came to the boarding house," she said. "Twice. Said he was looking for a room, but he wasn't looking at the rooms." Ethan turned to look at her fully. "What was he looking at?" "Me," she said. "Both times. Like he was filing something away." The muscle along Ethan's jaw did something complicated. "Clara," he said. "I'm not telling you to worry you," she said. "I'm telling you because you need to know." She held his gaze. "What else do you know about him?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, working something over. "He's bought out 3 homesteads this year," he said. "Always legal, always with paperwork. But the Henderson's South Quarter good land sold for 1/3 of what it was worth, and Tom Henderson's a careful man. Wouldn't have agreed to that price unless something else was in play." "Pressure," Clara said. "That's what I think." "Then he'll try to pressure you." "He can try," Ethan said. Quiet. Certain. Clara looked at him, at the set of his shoulders, the steadiness of his voice, and understood something about this man that hadn't been completely clear before. The stillness wasn't absence. It was bedrock. He was the kind of man who didn't rattle and didn't bluster about not rattling, and that combination was rarer than people recognized. "You're not afraid of him," she said. "I'm not afraid of him," Ethan agreed. "But I'm not careless either. He's got money and men and a judge in Pueblo who owes him." He paused. "What I don't have is anyone who'd stand witness if things went sideways." The word hung between them. Anyone. "You do now," Clara said. He looked at her for a long moment. The creek moved beneath them. Something in the afternoon light shifted. "You don't know what you're offering," he said, not unkindly, as a statement of fact. "I know exactly what I'm offering," Clara said. "I'm not a woman who says things she doesn't mean, Ethan." It was the first time she'd used his name directly. She watched it land. He turned back to the water, but something about the line of his shoulders had changed. Something released slightly. something that had been braced for a very long time. "All right," he said. She told Delphine the next morning. Delphine was at the kitchen table for her Thursday coffee. It had become a standing arrangement, one of those things that happened without being formally arranged, and she listened to the whole account without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When Clara finished, Delphine set down her cup. "He told you about Prescott," she said. "Yes. He doesn't tell people things." "I noticed." Delphine looked at her with a directness that Clara had come to understand was the woman's version of affection. "You understand what you're walking into." "I think so." "Prescott doesn't stop," Delphine said. "He didn't stop with the Hendersons. He didn't stop with the Garrity place. He found something on each of those families, and he used it quiet and careful until they signed." She pulled her cup closer. "The Hendersons' oldest boy had a debt in Denver. Garrity's wife had a sister in a difficult situation. Prescott found those things, and he applied them like a lever." She met Clara's eyes. "He'll look for your lever too." "I don't have much he can use," Clara said. "Everyone has something," Delphine said. "That's what men like him believe, and sometimes they're right." She paused. "The question is whether Ethan Callahan is worth it." Clara considered that. "I think," she said slowly, "the question is whether I'm the kind of person who walks away from something because it gets complicated, and I already know the answer to that." Delphine looked at her for a long time. Then she picked up her cup, drank the last of her coffee and said, "You'll need more than good intentions. You'll need proof of something. If Prescott forged documents with the Hendersons or the Garritys, he can do it again with Ethan's land. And a forged deed once recorded in Pueblo is very difficult to fight from a cattle ranch in the mountains." Clara's mind was already working. Who would know, she asked, if something was forged? Who would be able to see it? Delphine thought for a moment. "There's a land agent in Pueblo who came through 6 months ago, name of Aldridge. He looked at the Henderson transaction and said something wasn't right, but he couldn't prove it, and nobody had cause to push." She stood, gathering herself to leave. "He's still in Pueblo. The land records office is on 2nd Street. She buttoned her coat, picked up her basket. "Delphine," Clara said. The woman stopped. "Why are you helping?" Delphine looked at her with an expression Clara couldn't entirely read, something between exasperation and warmth. "Because Ethan Callahan has stood on that bridge for 3 years, she said. "And last Friday was the first time in all of those 3 years that he didn't leave exactly on time." She moved to the door. "I'd like to see what happens if someone gives him a reason to stay." She left. Clara sat at the kitchen table and thought about a man who came down from the mountain every week to stand at a bridge, and who had brought her cornbread, and who had said the word anyone with a particular emptiness, and who had looked at the water with something in his eyes that was starting just barely, just at the edges, to look like the future instead of the past. She thought about Prescott's men in the street, about what Delphine had said, about levers. She thought about the land agent in Pueblo named Aldridge. Then she went to find paper and wrote a letter. The 5th Friday changed everything. Clara arrived at the bridge at her usual time and found Ethan not at the south railing, but standing in the middle of the bridge, turned not downstream, but upstream, and his face was wrong tight in a way she hadn't seen before, controlled in the way of a man controlling something that wanted to break loose. "What happened?" she said before she even reached him. He turned. His eyes found her, and something in his expression shifted, something that had been holding itself rigid. Let go slightly. The way a man's posture changes when he sees the one person he didn't realize he'd been waiting for. "Someone's been on my land," he said. She stopped beside him. "Prescott's men. Can't prove it. But 3 fence lines on the east boundary cut clean. One of my water channels, the one that feeds the south pasture, blocked with stones. Deliberate, not natural." He paused. "And this morning I found one of my hands, young man named Cobb, who'd been with me 2 months, found him loading his gear. He quit. He quit." Ethan's voice was even. "Wouldn't say why. Wouldn't look at me. Took his pay and rode south." He looked out over the railing. "A man doesn't leave a job like that without a reason, and a man doesn't look at the ground when he's giving notice unless someone's put something in his head." "They threatened him," Clara said. Or paid him. Ethan's hands rested on the railing. She noticed his knuckles, noticed the effort of keeping them where they were. I'm one man running 400 acres of high country, Clara. I can manage it alone, I have managed it alone. But not if my water gets blocked and my fences get cut and my hands get bought off one by one. That's what he wants, she said. To wear you down without ever touching you directly. I know what he wants. He looked at her. What I don't know is what he'll do when wearing me down doesn't work. She looked at him steadily. It won't work. No, Ethan said. It won't. But the next step will be uglier, and I'd rather know it was coming than be surprised by it. He reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. This was in my post this morning, delivered from Pueblo. She took it, unfolded it. It was a notice. Legal language dense and careful, claiming that a portion of Ethan Callahan's east boundary, specifically the watershed parcel, had been purchased 3 years prior by a Doyle Prescott under an existing land grant, and that Mr. Callahan had 30 days to vacate that portion or face legal action in the Pueblo District Court. Clara read it twice, then she read it again. This isn't right, she said. No, Ethan said. It isn't. I bought that land myself 8 years ago from a man named Greer who'd homesteaded it. I have the deed. I have the original survey. He paused. But he has a judge in Pueblo, and if he files this document first, the burden of proof falls on me, not on him. And moving through a territorial court takes time and money, and you're one man, Clara said. And I'm one man. She looked at the document in her hands. The language was precise. Too precise, the specific kind of precision that came from someone who knew exactly what words to use to make a false claim look legitimate. She thought about what Delphine had said. A forged deed once recorded in Pueblo is very difficult to fight. She thought about the letter she'd written 5 days ago to a land agent named Aldridge in Pueblo. She'd sent it Thursday morning. She hadn't told Ethan. She looked up from the document and found him watching her with those level gray eyes. I need to tell you something, she said. All right. When you told me about Prescott the second time we talked when you mentioned the Hendersons, I wrote a letter to a land agent in Pueblo. Name of Aldridge. He looked at the Henderson transaction and thought something was wrong, but couldn't prove it. She held his gaze. I asked him if he'd be willing to look at your records if something came up. Ethan was very still. You did that, he said. Not a question. Not quite an accusation. Something in between a man recalibrating. Yes, Clara said. I should have told you, but I didn't know if anything would come of it, and I didn't want to give you something that might come to nothing. The silence stretched out. The creek ran below them. When did you send it? He asked. 5 days ago. He thought about that. His jaw worked through something. Why? He said. You had no stake in this. Clara looked at him for a moment, at this man who had stood on a bridge for 3 years, keeping faith with someone who was gone, who had brought her cornbread on a Friday afternoon, because nobody brought things to her, who had said the word anyone, as if it had a specific weight that he'd stopped expecting anyone to lift. I think you know why, she said. He held her gaze for a long time. The afternoon held them both in its heat and its stillness, and the sound of the water moving below. Clara, he said finally, in a voice that was different from any voice she'd heard from him, yet lower, more careful, carrying something he didn't have words for, but was offering anyway. There's something else, she said, because she had to finish now. When I walked down here today, I passed Prescott's men at the south end of the street. 2 of them. They watched me walk the whole way. Ethan went very still. Not threatening, she said. Just watching, filing it away the way Prescott does. The stillness in Ethan became something else, something harder. He knows you come here, he said. Yes. He knows you've been talking to me. Yes. And now he knows that He stopped. That this. He stopped again. That you're not alone, Clara said, quietly, precisely. His jaw tightened. His hands on the railing were very still and very deliberate. I won't let him use you, he said. Whatever move he's planning, I won't let it touch you. I know that, she said. But Ethan. She waited until he looked at her. I need you to understand that I didn't come to this bridge because I needed protecting. I came because I recognized something in you. And I thought maybe... She kept her eyes level on his. Maybe you could use someone standing beside you, not behind you, beside. He looked at her for a long time. The last light of the afternoon caught the creek and broke into pieces on the surface. There's going to be trouble, he said. I know, she said. Real trouble. Not just documents. Prescott doesn't stop at documents. I know that too. And you're still here. I'm still here, Clara said. Ethan Callahan looked at her, the way he looked at the water completely without hurry, and then he nodded. Once. Slow. Like a man who has finally, after a very long time, decided to believe something. Then we deal with it together, he said. The creek ran cold below the old wooden bridge. Above the valley clouds were building against the mountain ridge, the dark kind, the kind that meant weather coming in fast, and somewhere up on the high country, 400 acres of land and water rights were waiting for a fight that was no longer one man's burden to carry alone. Clara looked at the water. Ethan looked at the water. And neither of them, for the first time in longer than either could say, was standing there facing what was coming by themselves. The letter from Aldridge arrived on a Wednesday. Clara was in the kitchen when Margaret set it on the counter beside the flour bin without a word. But she watched Clara pick it up with the particular attention of a woman who had decided not to ask questions and was finding it difficult. Clara didn't open it in the kitchen. She went to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and broke the seal. Aldridge wrote the way men wrote when they were being careful. Formal language, measured sentences. Nothing that could be used against him in a courtroom. But what he said beneath the formality was clear enough. He had looked at the Henderson transaction 18 months ago and found 3 things that didn't sit right. The survey marks didn't match the original homestead filing. The notary seal on the transfer deed was from a notary who, according to Pueblo County records, had died 4 months before the document was dated. And the witness signatures, 2 of them required by territorial law, were in handwriting too similar to each other to have come from 2 separate people. He hadn't been able to prove any of it without the original documents, which the Hendersons no longer had. They'd handed everything over when they signed. At the bottom of the letter, in handwriting, slightly different from the rest, slightly faster, slightly less careful, Aldridge had written, "If Mr. Callahan has his original deed and survey in his possession, he should not let them out of his sight. Not for any reason. Not for anyone." Clara read that line 3 times. Then she put on her coat, told Margaret she needed an hour, and walked to the livery. She didn't own a horse. She'd never needed one in Greystone. But the liveryman, a quiet Swede named Bergstrom, rented animals without asking many questions, and within 20 minutes she was on a sturdy gray mare, heading up the mountain trail toward Ethan Callahan's ridge. She'd never been up the trail before. It was steeper than it looked from the valley, and the summer heat pressed down through the pine canopy in columns, and the mare picked her way with more sense than most people Clara knew. She followed the trail for 40 minutes before she saw the fence line, and another 10 before she saw the house. She hadn't let herself imagine what it would look like. But she noticed when she saw it that it was real, solidly built glass windows, a porch that had been added on with care, a garden along the south wall that someone had planted a long time ago, and that was still producing, untended but stubborn. The way things grew when they'd been put in the ground by someone who intended them to last. She tied the mare at the post and knocked. Ethan opened the door and looked at her for a moment, with the particular expression of a man who is surprised in a way he doesn't want to show. "Clara," he said. "I need to show you something," she said. "And I didn't want to wait until Friday." He stepped back and let her in. She showed him the letter at the kitchen table. He read it standing up, which she'd learned was how he read things that mattered, couldn't sit still for it. She watched his face while he read. It didn't change much. It never did with Ethan. But his jaw tightened at the notary seal detail, and when he got to Aldridge's handwritten note at the bottom, he stopped moving entirely. "The deed," he said. "Where is it?" Clara asked. I went to the back of the house without answering. She heard a drawer open, the sound of papers moving. He came back with a flat tin box, the kind used for documents, and set it on the table. "Everything's in here," he said. "Original deed, original survey, my correspondence with Greer, when I bought the land, the tax records for the last 8 years. He looked at the box. "I haven't looked at these in 2 years. I knew where they were, but I didn't think I needed them." "You need them now," Clara said. He opened the box, laid the documents out carefully. Clara looked at the deed handwritten, signed by Greer, notarized, dated 1874. The notary seal was clear and sharp. "This is legitimate," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "Prescott will claim his version is legitimate too." She looked at him. "He'll file first and make you prove yours is real. That's the strategy. He doesn't have to win, he just has to make the process expensive and slow enough that you give up." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I won't give up. I know that," Clara said. "But Aldridge can see something is wrong without having the original documents. If he had them or copies properly witnessed, he could file a counterclaim before Prescott's document gets recorded." She paused. "If Prescott's document isn't recorded yet?" Ethan looked at her. "That's a narrow window." "Yes," she said. "It is." He thought for a moment. "Pueblo's a day's ride." "I know, and Prescott has people watching the road." He said it plainly, not dramatically the way a man states a logistical problem. "If he sees me riding to Pueblo with a document box, he'll know what I'm doing, and he'll move faster." Clara had thought about this on the ride up. "Then you don't ride to Pueblo," she said. "You write to Aldridge with the details, the notary name, the dates. Everything that would let him verify your deed against county records without having the physical documents. He can start the process from that end." She paused. "And you keep the box somewhere that isn't here?" Ethan looked at her steadily. "Where?" "Margaret's cellar," she said. "Nobody looks in a boarding house cellar for land deeds." The silence stretched out. "You've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "Since I read the letter this morning." He looked at the documents spread on his kitchen table. Then he looked at her. And she saw something move through his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration, the same kind she'd seen on the bridge when she'd told him about writing to Aldridge. The look of a man adjusting to the fact that someone was actually here. "Clara," he said and stopped. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I want to," he said. "I'm just—" He stopped again. "I'm not practiced at this." "At what?" "At someone." He made a small gesture with his hand toward the documents, toward her, toward the space between them that had been narrowing by degrees for weeks. "At someone being in this with me." She held his gaze. "Get practiced," she said. "We don't have much time." Something shifted in his face, something that was close to a smile, but deeper, more serious, like sunlight on water that's very cold and very clear. "All right," he said. "Let's write the letter." They wrote it together at his kitchen table. Clara with the pen, because her handwriting was steadier. She'd learned that about herself in Kansas, that in a crisis, her hands went calm, while other parts of her did the work of being afraid. Ethan dictated. Precise, organized, nothing wasted. He knew the legal details of his land better than she'd expected, every survey mark, every boundary description, every date. She wrote while he talked, and when they had 3 pages, she read it back, and he caught 2 details she'd slightly misworded, and they corrected them. It was, she thought, the most functional thing she'd done with another person in 2 years. When they finished, she folded the letter and addressed it. "I'll take it to the post on my way back," she said. "I can take it." "You have cattle to check," she said. "And I pass the post office anyway." She began gathering the documents to put back in the tin. "The box, can you bring it Friday? We shouldn't wait." "I'll bring it Friday," he said. She closed the tin and set it back on the table. She picked up her coat. And then she paused, because something was sitting in the room between them that hadn't been fully said yet, and both of them knew it. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "That garden along the south wall," she said. "Is that Anna's?" The question landed quietly. She watched him receive it. "Yes," he said. "It's still growing," she said. "I noticed. was quiet for a moment. "I water it," he said. "I don't know why exactly. I don't use most of what comes up. I just—" He stopped. "Keep faith with it," Clara said. He looked at her for a long time. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. "Put on her coat." "I'll see you Friday," she said. She rode back down the mountain with the letter in her inside pocket, and she didn't let herself think too much about the kitchen table, or the document box, or the particular quality of working alongside someone who thought the same direction you did without needing to discuss it first. She thought about the garden instead, the things that kept growing because someone still showed up. She mailed the letter Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, everything had changed. She was at the general store when Harlan Briggs leaned across the counter with the particular posture of a man about to say something he's been holding all day. "You ought to know something," he said in a voice kept deliberately low. "Prescott was in here this morning. Asked about you." Clara set down the coffee tin she was holding. "What did he ask? Where you came from? How long you'd been here? Whether you had family?" Harlan's expression was uncomfortable. The expression of a man who had answered questions he now wished he hadn't. "I told him Kansas a few months and that I didn't know about family. That's all I said." "That's all right, Harlan," Clara said. "You didn't do anything wrong." "He also asked," Harlan said, and stopped. "What?" "He asked if you'd been seen going up the mountain trail." Harlan met her eyes. "I said I didn't know, because I didn't. But Bergstrom's boy saw you take the mare out yesterday morning, and that boy talks." Clara absorbed this. "Thank you," she said, and picked up the coffee tin and paid for it and walked out. Her mind was running calculations the whole way back to Margaret's. Prescott knew she'd been up the mountain. He knew she was connected to Ethan. He'd known that since he'd watched her walk to the bridge. And now he was asking about her background, her family, her origins. Looking for the lever. Just like Delphine had said, she had nothing he could use. She was certain of that, almost certain. She was a woman alone, no debts, no legal troubles, no family to threaten. Her past was clean in the way that catastrophe makes things clean when you've lost everything. There's nothing left to be vulnerable through. But then she thought about Ethan. And she thought about what she was to Ethan and what that meant if Prescott understood it. She walked faster. Friday came with the kind of heat that made the whole valley feel like it was holding its breath. Ethan arrived at the bridge earlier than she'd ever seen him. The Appaloosa dark with sweat from what must have been a hard ride down. He had the document box in his saddlebag. He had something else in his face, a tightness she recognized now as controlled urgency. "What happened?" she said before she reached the railing. "Cobb came back," he said. She stopped. "The hand who quit. He rode up this morning, early. Wouldn't get off his horse, just sat at the fence line and called for me." Ethan's voice was even, but she'd learned to read what was under his evenness. "He said Prescott paid him $50 to leave and to tell 2 other men in the valley that I'd been letting my cattle drift onto their land and fouling their water." He paused. "He said he took the $50 and he left. But he came back because—" Another pause. "Because Prescott told him the next part of it, and Cobb's 22 years old, and he's got some decency left in him." "What's the next part?" Clara asked. Ethan looked at her directly. "Prescott's hired a man from Pueblo, not a lawyer, the other kind." He let that sit for a moment. "And he's told people in town that if Ethan Callahan's so determined to hold on to that land, maybe someone should look into how he acquired it. Whether Greer actually had the right to sell." "He's going to challenge the original deed," Clara said. "He's going to claim Greer didn't have clear title," Ethan said. "Which means my purchase from Greer was void from the start. Which means the land never legally belonged to me." He paused. "It's not true. But proving it isn't true requires records that go back 20 years, and the man who could confirm Greer's original title is dead." Clara's mind was moving fast. Aldridge got our letter," Ethan said. "He wrote back, sent it express to the post here. I got it this morning." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it to her. She read it. Aldridge's tone was different now, less careful, more urgent. He'd checked the county records. Prescott had filed a preliminary claim 3 days ago. The 30-day window in the notice he'd sent Ethan was a legal formality. In reality, Prescott only needed the claim on record to force the burden of proof onto Ethan, and that was already done. But Aldridge had found something. The notary on Prescott's filed document. Different from the notary on the Henderson deed, but the same pattern was registered in Pueblo, under a name that appeared twice in the county records, once as a notary and once as a defendant in a fraud proceeding from 1879 that had been quietly dismissed. Dismissed because Prescott had paid someone. Aldridge had written, "This is not proof, but it is a thread. If someone can find the original fraud proceeding records, they were filed under case number 1879 CR 14 in the Pueblo District Court. There may be enough to challenge the notary's legitimacy on the current filing. This must be done before the 30-day window closes. I cannot retrieve those records myself without revealing my involvement. Someone else must go." Clara looked up from the letter. "Pueblo," she said. "Pueblo," Ethan agreed. "That's a day's ride each way." "Yes." "And Prescott is watching the road." "Yes." He held her gaze. "I can't go. If I leave the property for 2 days, his men will be on my land before I'm 10 miles down the valley. And if I leave the land, I'm not there to defend it." He paused. "I need someone who can ride to Pueblo, get those records from the district court, and bring them back to Aldridge without Prescott knowing the connection." The bridge was very quiet. "I'll go," Clara said. "Clara." "I'll go," she said again steadily. "Prescott is watching you. He's not watching me. Not closely enough. I'm a woman boarding at Margaret Tolliver's. Nobody thinks I'm a threat." "That's exactly why he might use you," Ethan said. "If he figures out what you're doing, then I don't let him figure it out." She folded Aldridge's letter and held it. "I can leave tomorrow morning. Tell Margaret I'm visiting a friend in Pueblo. Stay 2 nights, get the records, deliver them to Aldridge, and be back before the week is out." Ethan was quiet for a long time. "This isn't your fight," he said. "We settled that question," she said. "Clara." His voice changed, went lower, more direct. The voice he used when he was saying something he meant exactly. "If something happens to you because of this, because of me." "Something already happened to me," she said. "Before I came here. Before I ever saw this bridge or knew your name." She held his gaze. "I spent 2 years letting that be the only thing that defined me. I don't want to do that anymore." She paused. "And I don't think you do either." He looked at her. The creek ran beneath them. The summer pressed down. "The document box," he said finally. "Take it with you to Pueblo. Aldridge needs to see the original deed physically, not a description of it." He lifted the saddlebag strap from his shoulder. "It's everything. 8 years of tax records, the original deed, the survey, all of it. I'll keep it close," she said. "Clara." He said her name the way he said it now, like it meant something specific, something he hadn't had a word for before and was still learning to use carefully. "Be careful." "I'll be careful," she said. "And Ethan." She looked at him straight. "While I'm gone, don't let any of Prescott's men on your land. Not for any reason, not with any paperwork." "I won't." "And don't be alone more than you have to." She hesitated, then said it. "I'll worry about you." The thing that was almost a smile crossed his face, closer this time, almost real. "That's new." "New," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." She left before dawn on Saturday. Margaret asked no questions, which meant she had already formed her own conclusions and had decided they were acceptable. She packed Clara a cloth sack with food for the road and stood at the door in the gray early light and said only, "Ride careful. Road south of the creek crossing gets soft after rain." "There hasn't been rain in 3 weeks," Clara said. "I know," Margaret said. "I'm just practicing saying something useful." Clara rode out with the document box in her saddlebag, and Aldridge's letter memorized, and the particular calm that came to her in moments when there was nothing to do but move. She was 2 miles south of Greystone when she heard hooves behind her. She didn't stop. Didn't look back. Kept the mare at a steady walk and counted her own heartbeats and waited. The hoofbeats drew level with her. Miss Whitmore. She looked over. One of Prescott's men. She recognized him, the one who'd stood in the street and laughed. He was riding a bay horse and wearing a pleasant expression that didn't match his eyes. Early start, he said. Early errand, she said. Heading south. Visiting a friend. In Pueblo. He said it conversationally, as if it was a guess, as if it wasn't. That's right, she said, keeping her voice even. Long ride for a woman alone, he said. I've made longer. She held his gaze without difficulty. Is there something I can help you with, or are you planning to ride alongside me all the way to Pueblo? He smiled. The expression was practiced and revealed nothing. Just being neighborly, ma'am. Mr. Prescott likes to know the town's safe for travelers. I'm sure he does, Clara said. Give him my regards. She held the mare's pace. He rode with her for another quarter mile, then pulled back, and when she finally allowed herself to glance over her shoulder, he was sitting his horse in the road watching her go, and she thought, he'll ride back and tell Prescott, and Prescott will have to decide whether to stop me or let me go and find out what I know. She hoped Prescott chose the second option. She was counting on him being curious enough to wait. She rode harder after that. She reached Pueblo. Late the following afternoon, found a boarding house on the main street, and was at the district court office when it opened the next morning. The clerk was a thin man named Jessup, who looked at her the way clerks look at women who appear in their offices without a man accompanying them. Not hostile, just uncertain where to place her. I'm looking for a case record, Clara said. 1879. Criminal Proceeding Case Number 1879, CR 1144. Jessup looked at her. That's an old file. I know. What's your interest in it? I'm assisting a land agent named Aldridge, she said. He sent a letter on this matter. You may have received it. Something changed in Jessup's expression, a flicker of recognition quickly contained. Wait here, he said, and went into the back. I was gone a long time. Long enough that Clara began calculating what she would do if he came back with someone other than the file. Long enough that she became aware of the document box in her bag and its weight and what it represented. Jessup came back alone. He had a file folder, thin but intact. You'll need to read it here, he said. Can't let original records leave the office. That's fine, Clara said. Can I have paper to take notes? He provided paper. She sat at the counter and read the file. It took 40 minutes, and what she found in it was more than she'd expected and exactly what she'd hoped for. The 1879 proceeding was a fraud case involving a notary named Cornelius Hatch, the same name she confirmed against Aldridge's letter that appeared on Prescott's current filing. In 1879, Hatch had been charged with falsifying notary seals on 3 property transfer documents in El Paso County. The case had been dismissed when the primary witness recanted, and a note in the file, unofficial, handwritten in the margin, by someone who had not signed their name, read simply, witness recantation occurred 2 days after $200 deposit to witness's bank account. Source bank clerk off record. The case had been dismissed. Hatch had kept his notary license. But the record existed. The pattern existed. And a notary whose license should have been revoked in 1879, appearing on a fraudulent land claim in 1882, was a thread that Aldridge could pull. Clara copied everything. Names, dates, case number, the marginal note, the specific charges. She wrote fast, and she wrote everything. When she finished, she thanked Jessup, who watched her leave with an expression she didn't have time to interpret. She went directly to Aldridge's office, which was 3 blocks away on 2nd Street. Aldridge was a compact man in his 50s, with a watchmaker's precision about him. Every movement economical, every word placed deliberately. He received her without surprise, which meant he'd been expecting something, though perhaps not her specifically. She laid out the documents on his desk. The court notes. The original deed from the document box. The survey. The tax records. He looked at everything for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "The deed is clean." "Yes," Clara said, "and Hatch's history is documented." "In the court record," she said. I wrote everything down. Aldridge picked up her notes, read them, set them down. This isn't enough to overturn Prescott's filing on its own, he said. But it's enough to challenge Hatch's standing as a legitimate notary, which calls the filing itself into question. If I can get that in front of the right judge before the 30 days are out. He stopped, looked at her. You understand this could still go wrong. I understand, she said. Prescott has influence in this court. I know. And the judge who would hear this challenge. Aldridge paused carefully. Is not Prescott's judge. That's the one advantage. Clara thought of Ethan on his ridge, alone with his cattle and his fence lines and his water channels waiting. How long, she said. If I file today, I can request an emergency hearing within 2 weeks on the grounds of fraudulent notarization. Aldridge looked at his desk. Possibly 10 days. 10 days, Clara said. You'll need to get word to Callahan, Aldridge said. He needs to hold the land for 10 days without incident. If Prescott can claim trespassing destruction of property, anything that puts Callahan in a bad legal position before the hearing. I understand, Clara said. I'll get back today. It's afternoon, Aldridge said. The road. I know the road, she said, and stood and picked up the document box and shook his hand. File today, Mr. Aldridge? I will, he said. He looked at her for a moment. Mr. Callahan is fortunate. He's worked for what he has, she said. That's not fortune. I meant, Aldridge said carefully, in other respects. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her bag and left. She rode hard back north and arrived in Greystone after dark, 2 days after she'd left, and went directly to the boarding house. Margaret was waiting up. She set coffee on the table without being asked and sat across from Clara while she drank it and said nothing until Clara had finished. It's done, Clara said. Good, Margaret said. Prescott may know I went to Pueblo. He knows, Margaret said. His man came by asking about you the day you left. I told him you'd gone to visit a friend and I didn't know her name. Clara looked at her. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me, Margaret said. Just sleep. You look like you rode 2 days in one. I did, Clara said. She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel for the first time since Thursday the full weight of what she'd done and what was still to come. The hearing in 10 days. Prescott's response when he found out. The man from Pueblo that Cobb had mentioned, the other kind, not a lawyer. She thought about Ethan on the ridge, alone, waiting. She needed to get word to him. She went to the small desk in her room and lit the lamp and wrote a note. Short, careful, nothing in it that couldn't be explained innocently if someone else read it. Document delivered. 10 days. Hold the land. C.W. She sealed it and addressed it to Ethan Callahan and put it on the counter for the Morning Post. Then she lay down on the bed, still dressed, and was asleep in minutes. She woke before dawn to the sound of horses in the street. More than one. Moving fast, then stopping. She was at the window before she was fully awake. 3 men in the street below. The pre-dawn gray made it hard to see faces, but she recognized the horse, the bay, that Prescott's man had ridden alongside her on the road south. They weren't at the boarding house. They were further down the street near the livery. Then she realized. They weren't looking at the boarding house. They were looking up the mountain trail. And there, coming down through the pre-dawn dark, on his black Appaloosa, was Ethan Callahan. He'd come down from the ridge in the middle of the night, which meant something had happened. Something bad enough to bring him down before daylight, before his usual time, before anything. The 3 men saw him the same moment she did. She had about 30 seconds. She pulled on her boots, grabbed her coat, and ran. She hit the street just as Prescott's man stepped into the road in front of Ethan's horse, and she heard his voice loud, carrying the voice of a man making a show of things. Mr. Callahan, Mr. Prescott would like a word. Ethan stopped the Appaloosa. He looked at the man. He looked at the other 2 flanking out to either side. His face was very still and very cold. Step out of my road, he said. Now, Mr. Callahan, there's no need for— Step out of my road, Ethan said again. The same tone, no louder. The kind of voice that meant it the same amount both times. Clara came around the corner and walked directly toward them and said clearly, "Ethan." All four men looked at her. Ethan looked at her and something moved through his expression. Relief and something else, something. She filed away to think about later. "Miss Whitmore," said Prescott's man, "you're up early." "So are you," she said. She looked at Ethan. "I got back last night. Come have breakfast." It was such an ordinary thing to say, in such an unordinary moment, that it took the men around them a beat to process it. Ethan looked at her for a moment. Looked at the three men. Back at her. He dismounted. Tied the Appaloosa at the post. Walked past Prescott's man without looking at him. "Morning," he said to Clara, and the word was so quiet, and so steady, and so full of things neither of them were going to say in front of three men in the pre-dawn street that she had to look away for a moment. They walked toward Margaret's together. Behind them, she heard Prescott's man say something to the other two in a low voice. She didn't catch the words. She didn't need to. She could feel the shape of what was coming. 10 days until the hearing. A man from Pueblo who wasn't a lawyer. Prescott, who didn't stop at documents. She walked beside Ethan in the early morning dark and thought, hold the land for 10 days. She thought hold. She thought whatever it takes. And beside her, Ethan Callahan walked without hurry through the street of Greystone, Colorado, and she could feel from 3 feet away the particular quality of a man who had decided something in the night and had ridden down from the mountain to act on it, and whose hand when it brushed her arm as they turned toward Margaret's door did not move away. It stayed. Just for a moment. It stayed. Margaret didn't ask why a man was sitting at her kitchen table before sunrise. She set a plate in front of Ethan, poured coffee, and left them alone with the particular tact of a woman who had run a boarding house long enough to know that some conversations needed walls around them and nothing else. Ethan wrapped both hands around the cup and didn't drink it right away. He looked at the table. Clara sat across from him and waited because she'd learned that was the right thing to do. "They came up the mountain last night," he said. She went still. 2 of them. Not Prescott's regular men, different ones. They came at 11 o'clock, which tells you something about what they were there for, because honest men don't ride up a mountain trail at 11 o'clock. He paused. "They didn't come into the house. They went to the barn." "The cattle," Clara said. "3 of my horses. Turned them out of the paddock and left the gate open." He looked up at her. "I heard them go. Got out in time to see the horses running. Spent 3 hours in the dark getting them back." Something moved through his expression. Not anger, something colder. "They wanted me tired. Wanted me out of the house and occupied so they could look for something." "The documents," Clara said. "The documents are with you," he said. "But they didn't know that." He held her gaze. "When I got back inside, someone had been through the back room. Drawers open. Papers moved." Clara thought about the tin box now sitting under the floorboard beneath her bed at Margaret's, and felt the particular cold clarity of a narrow escape. "Ethan," she said. "Aldridge filed yesterday. There's a hearing in 10 days. Something shifted in his face. 10 days, he said. 10 days, she confirmed. "We need to hold everything together for 10 days. No incident, no." "They know that," he said quietly. "That's why last night happened. They're going to push until I push back, and the moment I push back, I give Prescott something to use." "Then you don't push back." "I had 3 men on my property in the middle of the night, Clara." "I know," she said. "And you have to let it go, for 10 days. He looked at her for a long moment. The muscle in his jaw worked through something difficult. "That's the hardest thing you've asked me," he said. "I know that too," she said. "Can you do it?" He picked up the coffee, drank it, set the cup down. "Yes," he said. He stayed through breakfast. Gerald ate his biscuits in the corner and pretended not to notice that the kitchen had an unfamiliar occupant, which was Gerald's version of manners. Margaret refilled cups without comment. Clara ate and watched Ethan eat, and thought about how natural it felt, how simply, and without drama, he fit into the space of an ordinary morning, this man who had been sealed up on a mountain for 3 years. When he stood to leave, He stopped in the kitchen doorway. "The note you sent," he said. "I got it yesterday evening, before they came." He looked at her. "I rode down this morning because I needed to know you were back safe. That was the whole reason." She held his gaze. "I'm back safe," she said. He nodded once, put on his hat. 10 days, he said. 10 days, she said. He left. She listened to the Appaloosa's hooves moving up the street toward the mountain trail, and she sat with her coffee and thought about a man who had ridden down from his mountain in the pre-dawn dark. Not because of the hearing, not because of Prescott, but because he needed to know she was back. She was going to have to think carefully about that. Later. Right now, there was too much else to do. The first 3 days were quiet in the way that meant something. Prescott's men were visible in town, present watching, doing nothing specific that anyone could name. It was a particular kind of pressure, the kind designed to make a person feel observed, and therefore careful, and therefore limited. Clara moved through her days at the boarding house and the general store and Delphine's kitchen, with the deliberate ordinariness of someone who understood that being watched meant every action was being interpreted. Delphine noticed. "You're walking different," she said on the second day, wringing out a shirt with her usual force. "Am I?" Clara said. "Like someone who knows they're being watched and is making choices about it." Delphine looked at her sideways. "That's not a criticism. That's a skill." "Prescott's men are in town." "They've been in town." Delphine set the shirt aside. "2 new ones arrived yesterday. From Pueblo, I'd guess by the horses. Not cowboys. Something else." Clara thought about what Cobb had said. The other kind. What do they look like? Like men who get paid to solve problems that other men don't want solved openly. Delphine's voice was matter-of-fact. "One of them asked Bergstrom yesterday whether Ethan Callahan came to town regular. Bergstrom told him Fridays. Today was Wednesday." "How many days until—" Delphine started. 7, Clara said. Delphine was quiet for a moment. "I'll start locking my front door at night," she said, which from Delphine was the equivalent of a declaration of war. On the 4th day, Prescott himself came to the boarding house. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard the knock. Heard Margaret's measured footsteps to the door. Heard the voice she'd heard before, only at a distance. Smooth. Unhurried, the voice of a man who had rarely been told no by anyone who mattered. "Mrs. Tolliver, I was hoping to speak with your boarder, Miss Whitmore." Margaret's voice. "She's occupied." "I won't take much of her time." A pause. Then Margaret said, "Clara," with the flat inflection of a woman conveying multiple things at once. Clara took off her apron, hung it on the hook, walked to the front room. Prescott was larger than she'd expected from a distance, broad through the chest, well-dressed in the way that announced money, without elegance. He had a face that had once been open and had become something managed and deliberate, the face of a man who had learned that expressions were tools. He held his hat in his hands and smiled when she appeared, and the smile was practiced and almost warm. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Doyle Prescott. I don't believe we've been formally introduced." "We haven't," she said. She didn't offer her hand. If he noticed, he didn't show it. "I understand you recently took a trip to Pueblo." "I did," she said. "A long ride for a woman alone." "People keep saying that," she said. "I keep making it fine." Something flickered in his expression, reassessed, recalibrated, gone. "I hope you found what you were looking for." "I visited a friend," she said. "It was a good visit." He looked at her for a moment. The assessment in it was professional and complete, and she felt it the way you feel someone taking stock of your inventory. "You've become friendly with Ethan Callahan," he said. Not accusatory, conversational. "I've spoken with him," she said. "He's a man who keeps to himself," Prescott said. "Always has. I've tried to do business with him and found him resistant to reason." He paused. "I worry about him up there alone. That property is a significant responsibility for one man." "He seems to manage it fine," Clara said. "For now," Prescott said pleasantly. "Things can change." He held her gaze for just a beat too long. "I understand you lost your family in Kansas, Miss Whitmore. I'm sorry for that. A woman in your position alone, no family working for room and board well. It would be a shame to find yourself in a difficult situation so far from home." The room went very quiet. Margaret from the doorway behind Clara said nothing, but Clara heard her shift her weight. "Mr. Prescott," Clara said, keeping her voice even and her eyes on his. "If you have a specific proposition, I'd suggest you make it directly. I don't have time for the other kind." Something changed in his face. The warmth went out of it, and what was left was more honest and considerably less pleasant. "I'm simply suggesting," he said, "that Ethan Callahan's troubles are not your troubles, and a woman with no stake in a land dispute would be wise to stay clear of it." "Thank you for the advice," Clara said. "Is there anything else?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he put his hat back on. "Good day, Miss Whitmore," he said. He left. Clara stood in the front room and breathed carefully and waited until she heard his horse moving away down the street. Margaret came to stand beside her. "Well," Margaret said. "Yes," Clara said. "He's not accustomed to being spoken to that way by someone in your position." "I know. That will make him angry. I know that too." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "You should write to Ethan tonight," she said. "Tell him Prescott came here. He needs to know the man is moving." "I will," Clara said. But she was already thinking about something else. Something in the way Prescott had said, "I worry about him up there alone." The emphasis. The way it landed. Not a threat about Ethan's land. A threat about Ethan himself. She wrote the note in 10 minutes and had it on the post counter before dark. The next morning, the letter came. Not from Ethan. Not from Aldridge. From a lawyer in Pueblo named Gareth, representing the interests of one Doyle Prescott, addressed to Clara Whitmore, care of the Tolliver Boarding House, Greystone, Colorado. She opened it at the kitchen table with Margaret watching. It was 3 pages of legal language, precise and careful. And what it said, stripped of the language, was this: that Clara Whitmore, a recent arrival in Greystone with no legal standing or property in the territory, had interfered in a legitimate legal proceeding by obtaining and transmitting private court records from the Pueblo District Court without authorization, and that Mr. Prescott's legal team was prepared to file a complaint against her with the territorial court unless she ceased all involvement in matters pertaining to Mr. Ethan Callahan's property dispute, and agreed in writing to provide a statement that she had been asked by Mr. Callahan to obtain said records on his behalf, which statement could then be used in the proceeding. Clara read it twice. Then she understood what it was. It wasn't a legal threat. There was no law she'd broken. Jessup at the district court had let her read a public record and take notes. That was legal. Prescott's lawyer knew that. This was the lever. He'd found it. Not her family, not her debts, not her past. Something simpler and more immediate. I was going to threaten her with legal action. She couldn't afford to fight a woman alone. No money, no lawyer, no family, unless she gave him a statement that would destroy Ethan's case and make Ethan look like he'd used her to do his dirty work. It was elegant, she thought. In a deeply ugly way, it was elegant. She folded the letter, put it in her pocket. "Clara, I need to go up the mountain," Clara said. "It's Wednesday," Margaret said. "Not Friday." "I know," Clara said. She rode up in the late morning and found Ethan mending the east fence line, the one that had been cut 3 times now. He saw her coming from a distance, she could tell by the way he stopped working and turned to watch her ride in, and by the time she reached him, his expression had already told her he knew something was wrong. She handed him the letter without preamble. He read it standing there, one hand holding the letter and one hand still holding the fence tool he'd been working with, and she watched his face the way she always watched his face for what moved beneath the surface of it. When he finished, he was very still. "He found something to use against you," he said. "He tried to," she said. "It won't work." Ethan looked up from the letter. "Clara, he's threatening you with a legal proceeding. A false one," she said. "I didn't do anything improper. I read a public record. It doesn't matter whether it's false." His voice was controlled, but she could hear the effort of controlling it. Fighting a false legal claim costs money and time and... He stopped. You don't have either of those things. Neither do you, she pointed out. That's different. How? He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something between frustration and something else. Something that had no name yet, but was taking up space in the way of something significant. Because this is my land, he said. My fight. You came into this because you... He stopped. Tried again. Because you chose to, and I let you. I shouldn't have. Ethan, she said very steadily. Don't do that. Do what? Decide on my behalf what I should and shouldn't have done. She held his gaze. I made choices. I'd make them again. What I need from you right now is not regret. I need to think through what to do about this letter. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he was working through something and wasn't going to argue while he did it. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to send it to Aldridge today, she said. He needs to know Prescott is trying to suppress a witness, which is what this amounts to. That may itself be useful at the hearing. Ethan thought about it. Prescott will know you didn't comply. Yes, he'll know by Friday that I didn't send back a statement. That's 2 days. 5 days until the hearing, she said. Whatever he's going to do next, he'll do it in those 5 days. Ethan looked at the fence line, at the cut wire that had been cut and remended and cut again, at his land stretching up the ridge behind them. There's something I haven't told you, he said. She waited. 2 nights ago, night before last, Cobb came back again. Second time. He set the fence tool down. He said Prescott's man from Pueblo, the one who isn't a lawyer, his name is Decker. He's known in the Southern Territory. He handles things when other methods haven't worked. What kind of things? Ethan looked at her directly. Fires, he said. Equipment. Accidents that look like accidents. The word hung between them in the summer air. He's been in Greystone since Monday, Ethan said, staying at the hotel on the far end. Cobb saw him meeting with Prescott's main man yesterday morning. Clara thought about 5 days. About a hearing in Pueblo that Prescott couldn't afford to lose. About a man named Decker who handled things that looked like accidents. He'll go for the barn, she said. Ethan nodded slowly. That's what I think. Barn and the hay storage. Dry summer. Everything's tinder. I'd lose not just this year's hay, the barn structure, the equipment, 2 of the horses I can't easily replace. He paused. And without equipment, I can't work the land through the fall, which means I miss tax payments, which gives Prescott a different legal avenue entirely. When? Clara asked. Before the hearing, Ethan said. Has to be. They looked at each other. You can't stay up here alone, she said. I'm not leaving my land. I'm not asking you to leave it, she said. I'm saying you can't be the only one watching it. She thought for a moment. Cobb, can he be trusted? He came back twice. He's young, Ethan said. He's scared. But he came back, which means something. Does he have a reason to want Prescott to lose? Prescott paid him $50 and told him to spread lies, Ethan said. He's 22 and he took the money, and he spent the last 2 weeks not sleeping because of it. He paused. Yes, I think he can be trusted. Then ask him to come back, Clara said. Tonight. Tell him what's at stake. 2 sets of eyes on the barn is better than 1. And you, Ethan said. What are you going to do? I'm going to write to Aldridge today, she said. And I'm going to talk to Delphine. He looked at her. Delphine. She knows everyone in this valley, Clara said. And she's been watching Prescott buy up land for a year and a half. She's not the only one. She held his gaze. Prescott thinks this is between him and you. He's wrong. Something moved through Ethan's expression, slow, deliberate, the look of a man seeing something from a new angle. You're going to get the town involved, he said. I'm going to remind the town, she said, that if Prescott takes your water rights, it's not just your problem. It's every farm in the South Valley in a dry summer. And this summer is the driest in 10 years. He looked at her for a long moment. When I came down this morning, he said quietly, when I came down from the mountain and you were riding up the trail, I thought... He stopped. I don't know what I thought. Tell me, she said. He looked at his hands for a moment. I thought that I'd spent 3 years coming down that mountain for something that was gone, he said. And then one Friday, you walked to the bridge and asked me a question, and He stopped again. I don't have the right words for it. You don't need the right words, she said. I need you to know, he said, that whatever happens with the hearing, whatever Prescott does in the next 5 days, what you've done, what you are to me now. He looked up. Those gray eyes level and full of something she'd been watching build for months. That doesn't depend on any of it. The fence line stretched along the ridge. The summer heat pressed down. Clara looked at him for a long time. I know, she said. And Ethan. She paused. Same. He held her gaze. Then he picked up the fence tool and said, Help me finish this line before you go back down. She swung down from the mare. She picked up the other end of the wire. They worked the fence line together in the summer heat, and neither of them said anything more about it, and neither of them needed to. She was back in Greystone by early afternoon and at Delphine's door inside the hour. Delphine listened to everything without interrupting the letter from Prescott's lawyer, Decker the Barn, the 5 days. When Clara finished, Delphine sat very still for a moment, in the way she did when she was thinking hard. Then she said, Henderson. Clara blinked. Tom Henderson. He sold because Prescott found his sons dead in Denver, Delphine said. But he's known all along that what he signed wasn't right. He's been carrying that for 18 months. She met Clara's eyes. If someone told him there was a way to make it right, if someone told him that what happened to him is documented in a court record in Pueblo, and that a land agent is filing on Callahan's behalf. He might testify, Clara said. He might, Delphine said. And Henderson's not the only one. Garrity lost his place last fall. He's still in the valley farming a smaller piece, and he's a man who doesn't forgive easily. Clara thought about the hearing, about Aldridge in Pueblo with the Hatch records and Ethan's clean deed, about a judge who wasn't Prescott's judge. Witnesses, she said. Not to Ethan's deed, to Prescott's pattern, a man who's done something twice. Delphine said, has done it more than twice. Courts understand patterns. Can you talk to Henderson today? Clara asked. I do his laundry, Delphine said, standing up. I can be there in an hour. Clara looked at her. Delphine, why are you doing all of this? The woman pulled her coat from the hook by the door and settled it on her shoulders with the brisk efficiency of someone with places to be. Because I've lived in this valley for 22 years, she said, and I have watched men like Prescott come through and take what wasn't theirs, and I have watched good people let them do it because it was easier than fighting. She picked up her basket. And because Ethan Callahan has been standing on that bridge for 3 years, and the only person who ever walked up and asked him why was you. She opened the door. That counts for something. She left. Clara stood in the empty kitchen for a moment. Then she went to find paper and wrote to Aldridge. 2 days before the hearing, Decker made his move. It was 3 in the morning when Cobb came pounding on Margaret's door, and Clara was dressed and in the street before the second knock. Cobb was 17-year-old in a grown man's body, and right now he looked every year of 17, wide-eyed, breathing hard. Fire, he said. He got the hay storage, east side of the barn. Clara's heart dropped. How bad, she said. Ethan got there fast, Cobb said. We saw them coming. We were watching like you said. He got the horses out. But the hay is gone, and the east wall. He swallowed. And there was a man. When Ethan went for the horses, there was a man inside who wasn't supposed to be there. Decker, Clara said. I don't know his name, but he was there, and when Ethan came back out, they... Cobb stopped. Say it, Clara said. They fought, Cobb said. Ethan's hurt. Not bad, he told me, not bad, but his side something with his side, and he wouldn't let me come for the doctor, he just sent me here. She was already moving to the livery. Come with me, she said, and wake Bergstrom on the way. I need that mare fast. She rode up the mountain in the dark, for the second time. And this time, the darkness felt different, pressing close with the smell of smoke threading through the pine air even before she saw the glow from the east side of the ridge. Ethan was at the water trough when she arrived, shirt gone, pressing a wet cloth to his left side. He looked up when he heard the mare, and something in his expression did what it always did when he saw her arrive somewhere. He hadn't expected that particular quality of a man, recalibrating to the fact that someone had come. "I told Cobb not to," he started. "Cobb did exactly right," she said, dismounting. She crossed to him and moved his hand aside and looked at the wound. A gash long and not shallow along his left ribs. Her stomach clenched, but her hands stayed steady. "What happened?" "Decker had a knife," Ethan said with the flat practicality of a man reporting a logistical development. "I didn't." "You need a doctor." "I need a bandage." "Ethan." "Clara." He met her eyes. "I need a bandage, and I need to know what's happening with the hearing, and I need you to tell me you're all right in that order." She looked at him for a moment. "I'm all right," she said. "The hearing is in 2 days. Henderson agreed to testify. So did Garrity." She paused. "Aldridge filed the Hatch challenge 6 days ago. It's on record." Ethan absorbed this. "And Decker," she said. "Gone," Ethan said. "He ran when Cobb shouted. He got what he came for. The hay is gone, the east wall is damaged. But the horses are safe, and the barn is standing, and the deed is in a cellar in Margaret's boarding house." He looked at the smoldering east wall. He didn't get what Prescott actually needed. "The deed," she said. "Evidence of a clean title," he said. "Without that, the hearing is just Prescott's document against my word." He looked at her. "He knows the records went to Aldridge. He knows the hearing is going to happen, and he still sent Decker." He paused. "That tells you something." "He's desperate," Clara said. "He's losing," Ethan said. Clara found cloth in the barn stores and bound his side with more competence than gentleness, because gentleness right now wasn't what the situation called for, and Ethan bore it without complaint and kept his eyes on her face while she worked. "You came up in the dark again," he said after a while. "Yes," she said. "Second time." "Third," she said. "I came up that Wednesday in the afternoon, remember?" The corner of his mouth moved. "Third time," he said. She tied off the bandage. Her hands stilled on his side for just a moment, not medical, just present, and then she stepped back. "You need to come down to town," she said. "Both of you, tonight. I won't leave you up here alone with a burned wall and Decker still in the valley. I can't leave the—" "Cobb stays," she said. "And I'll ask Bergstrom's son, he's 18, and he's been watching Prescott's men with the same look my brother used to get when someone was doing something wrong near him." She held his gaze. "2 men on this property. You come down, see the doctor, sleep in a bed for 1 night. She paused. "The hearing is in 2 days, Ethan. I need you standing up straight in front of that judge." He looked at her for a long moment. "You planned this," he said. "Bergstrom's son, you already talked to him." "Yesterday afternoon," she said, "before Decker came." "I knew Decker was coming," she said. "Not the exact night, but I knew." She met his eyes. "I should have pushed harder for you to come down sooner. That's on me." He was quiet. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said, because she could hear in the shape of the word what was coming, and she wasn't ready for it in the middle of a burned hay yard at 3 in the morning. "I just need to say it once," he said. She waited. "I don't know how to—" He stopped. "I've been alone a long time, and I know what that did to me, and I know it's not easy to—" He stopped again. The words were clearly costing him, each one pulled up from somewhere deep and long, undisturbed. "You walked up to that bridge and asked me a question that nobody in 3 years had thought to ask, or thought they had the right to ask, and everything since then has been—" He looked at her. "I'm not the same man I was that Friday." She held very still. "Neither am I," she said finally, quietly. Cobb was somewhere in the dark on the other side of the barn, giving them this with the instinctive tact of someone young enough to still believe in such things. The sky was beginning to change at the edges, the deep black going slightly gray, the stars thinning. "Come down the mountain," Clara said. "Please." Ethan Callahan looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out, and with one careful hand, tucked a loose strand of hair back from her face, the simplest gesture, the kind that cost nothing and meant everything, and said, "All right." They reached Greystone as the sun was coming up, and Prescott was waiting. Not in the street this time. At the post office, standing beside a man in a town suit whom Clara had never seen, and between them they held a document that Prescott extended toward Ethan as he dismounted with the unhurried manner of a man playing a card he'd been saving. "Mr. Callahan," Prescott said, "this is a writ of attachment from the Pueblo District Court. On the grounds that your property is subject to an active title dispute, the court has ordered that no transfer, sale, or modification of said property may occur pending resolution." He paused. "And as you're currently unable to post a bond of $1,000 to contest the writ, the property will be administered by a court-appointed receiver until the matter is settled." Ethan took the document. "Read it." His face showed nothing. Clara read it over his arm. Her mind ran through it fast, and what she understood made her stomach drop. It wasn't about the hearing anymore. Prescott had gotten to a judge, not the hearing judge, a different one, and gotten an attachment order. A receiver meant someone appointed by the court would take control of the property while the dispute was pending. A receiver appointed by Prescott's judge. Who would manage the land control access, prevent Ethan from working it? It was legal. It was legitimate. And it was designed to make the hearing irrelevant, because by the time the hearing happened, someone else would already be in control of the land. She looked at the man in the town suit. "Are you the receiver?" she asked. He looked at her with mild surprise at being addressed. "I am." "When does the attachment take effect?" "Immediately upon service," he said. "And Mr. Callahan has no recourse. He may post a bond of $1,000. "He doesn't have $1,000, Prescott said pleasantly. "Nobody in this valley has $1,000. That's the point." He looked at Ethan with the expression of a man who has waited a long time for a particular moment and is allowing himself to enjoy it. Ethan stood with the writ in his hand and said nothing. Clara looked at the writ, looked at Prescott, looked at the receiver, and then she thought about Aldridge's letter. The one that had said the judge who would hear this challenge is not Prescott's judge. Not Prescott's judge. But this writ came from a different judge entirely, which meant Prescott had gone around the hearing by using a second judge to issue an attachment order, which meant the two actions were now in conflict: a hearing before one judge and an attachment from another, which meant this was no longer a straightforward land dispute. This was judicial interference. She looked at Ethan. "Don't say anything," she said quietly but urgently. "Not one word." He looked at her. "I mean it," she said. "Nothing." Then she turned to Prescott, and she heard her own voice come out clear and level, the voice she used when her hands were calm and the rest of her was doing the work of being afraid. "Mr. Prescott," she said, "you have an attachment order from one judge and an active hearing before a second judge, both pertaining to the same property filed within the same 30-day window." She held his gaze. "That's not a land dispute anymore. That's simultaneous jurisdiction. And the territorial court in Denver has very specific rules about what happens when two judges issue conflicting orders on the same matter." Prescott looked at her. The receiver looked at her. The man in the street looked at her. "I suggest," she said, "that before your receiver takes one step onto Mr. Callahan's property, you telegraph your lawyer in Pueblo and ask him to explain what happens when a party deliberately engineers a jurisdictional conflict to circumvent a scheduled hearing." She paused. "Because I can tell you what happens. It gets referred to the territorial court in Denver, where Doyle Prescott has considerably less influence than he does in Pueblo." The silence that followed was the loudest kind. Prescott's face had gone through several things and arrived at something controlled and cold. "You're a boarding house cook," he said. "I'm a woman who can read a legal document," she said, "and I just read yours." Beside her she heard Ethan make a sound barely audible but present. She recognized it. It was the thing that had been almost a smile for months and had just now finally become one. Prescott looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the receiver and said something low, and the receiver's expression shifted into something uncertain. The expression of a man who has just started to wonder whether the ground he's standing on is solid. "This isn't over," Prescott said. "No," Clara said. It isn't. The hearing is in 2 days. We'll see you there. Prescott put on his hat, turned, walked away. The receiver stood for a moment longer, looked at the writ in his hand with new uncertainty, and then followed. Ethan stood beside Clara in the early morning street of Greystone, and neither of them moved until both men were out of sight. Then he said very quietly, "Where did you learn that, about jurisdictional conflict?" "Aldridge's first letter," she said. "He mentioned it in passing. I've been thinking about it for a week." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You've been carrying that for a week," he said, "waiting to use it." "Hoping I wouldn't have to," she said. "But yes." He looked at her profile for a long moment. "Clara Whitmore," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have never in my life," he said, "been more grateful for a question somebody asked me." She looked at him. The early morning light caught his face, and the thing that had been building for months was right there on the surface of it, no longer held back, no longer careful, no longer waiting. "2 days," she said. "Hold together for 2 more days." "I'll hold," he said. And she believed him. The doctor's name was Fenner, and he had the unhurried manner of a man who had seen enough emergencies to know that panic never sped up healing. He looked at Ethan's side, said knife wound, the way another man might say, bad weather, and stitched it with the same economy. Ethan sat on the edge of the examining table and didn't make a sound the entire time, which Fenner acknowledged with a single nod of professional respect when he tied off the last stitch. 3 days off horseback, Fenner said. "I have a hearing in 2 days, Ethan said. "Then 2 days off horseback, and you ride to Pueblo sitting straight." Fenner wrapped the bandage with practiced efficiency. "You favor that side the stitches pull. I'll be doing this again in a week." "Understood," Ethan said. Fenner looked at Clara, who was standing by the door. "Keep him still today." "I'll do my best," she said. "Nobody keeps Ethan Callahan still," Fenner said not unkindly, and went to wash his hands. They walked back to Margaret's in the early morning quiet. Ethan moving with the careful deliberateness of a man measuring each step, and Clara walked beside him and matched his pace without comment. Margaret had coffee on the table when they arrived, and Gerald was in his corner with his biscuit, and nobody said anything about the fact that a mountain rancher with fresh stitches was sitting in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, because that was how Margaret Tolliver's household handled extraordinary circumstances, by treating them as ordinary until they were. "Henderson is coming at noon," Clara told him, setting a cup in front of him. "He wants to talk to you before the hearing." Ethan looked at her. "You arranged that?" "Delphine arranged it," she said. "I just asked Delphine." He was quiet for a moment. "I haven't spoken to Tom Henderson in 2 years. Not since he sold." "I know," she said. "He knows that too. He's been carrying it." "He did what he had to do," Ethan said. "I never blamed him." "Tell him that," Clara said. "At noon." "Okay." Henderson arrived exactly at noon. A compact, sunburned man in his late 40s who held his hat in both hands when he came through the door and looked at Ethan the way a man looks at someone he owes an apology to and hasn't figured out how to give it. Ethan stood up. "Tom," he said. "Ethan." Henderson's jaw worked for a moment. "I heard about your barn. I should have..." He stopped. "I should have come to you a year ago, before any of this." "Sit down," Ethan said. Henderson sat. Clara poured coffee and took the chair beside Margaret's desk, far enough to give them space close enough to hear. "What Prescott did to us," Henderson said. "The way he found out about Robert's debt in Denver, I still don't know how he knew. But he had the papers, had the amounts, the dates, everything. Said if we didn't sign, he'd have Robert arrested." He looked at his coffee cup. "Robert's 24. He made a mistake. I couldn't..." "You protected your boy," Ethan said. "I'd have done the same." Henderson looked up. Something in his face cracked slightly and then held. "You would have fought him." "I have the advantage," Ethan said simply, "of having nobody to protect but myself." He paused. "That's not always the advantage it sounds like." Henderson absorbed that. "The woman in Pueblo found the court record," Henderson said. He glanced at Clara, then back. "The notary. Hatch. Prescott used the same man on our deed. I didn't know that until Delphine came yesterday. His voice tightened. He's been doing this. Same method, same man, probably more than just us. We think so, Clara said. Aldridge is looking. I'll testify, Henderson said. Whatever they need me to say about what Prescott told us, what he threatened, all of it. He looked at Ethan. I should have done it when it happened to me. Maybe you'd have been spared. Tom, Ethan said. Stop. He held the man's gaze. You came now. That's what matters. Henderson nodded, swallowed, put his hat back on. Garrity's coming too, he said. He called me this morning, said if Henderson was going, he was going. He stood. We'll be in Pueblo by tomorrow evening. He left. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. He's been carrying that for 18 months, Ethan said. Yes, Clara said. And you gave him a way to put it down. She looked at him. Delphine did. Clara, he said with the patient tone of a man who has said someone's name this way before and will say it again. You did. She picked up the coffee cups and took them to the wash basin and didn't say anything because there was a particular kind of gratitude in his voice that she didn't know how to receive gracefully yet, and she was still learning. The afternoon brought something she hadn't expected. She was in the back room helping Margaret with mending when she heard the front door, and then Margaret's voice saying her name in the careful tone that meant someone was there who required attention. She came out to find a young woman in the front room. Late teens, plain dress. The look of someone who has walked a distance and is pretending it wasn't far. She had Prescott's jaw and Prescott's eyes, and Clara recognized the resemblance before the girl spoke. Miss Whitmore, she said. Yes, Clara said. My name is Eliza Prescott. She said it the way people said their last name when they were aware of what it meant to the person they were saying it to. Doyle Prescott is my father. The room held very still. Sit down, Miss Prescott, Clara said. The girl sat. She had her hands folded in her lap, and she held them there with effort, the hands of someone who was working to appear steadier than she felt. I know what my father has been doing, she said. I've known for a long time. I'm not here to defend him. She looked at Clara directly. I'm here because he has something that isn't in any of the legal documents. Something he hasn't used yet. Clara waited. When he found out you went to Pueblo, Eliza said, he had someone look into your history in Kansas. The land claim, the sale, everything. She paused. The man you sold to Harding. I think the name was. He filed an amended claim 6 months after you left. He says you signed over water rights that weren't included in the original sale, and he's been trying to locate you to serve a civil complaint. Clara felt something cold move through her chest. That's not true, she said. I believe you, Eliza said. But my father has a copy of Harding's complaint. It's probably not legitimate. He said the same kind of thing to the Garrity family about an old fence dispute. But if he files it with the territorial court before tomorrow's hearing, and it names you as a party in an existing civil action, it puts my credibility in question, Clara said. Anything I've provided to Aldridge, any statement I've made, it won't invalidate the deed, Eliza said. But it could slow the hearing, create enough doubt. She met Clara's eyes. He's planning to file it tonight, before you leave for Pueblo. Clara sat very still. Why are you telling me this? She said. Eliza looked at her hands. Because I have watched my father do this to people my entire life, she said. And because, she stopped. Because I have a mother who died when I was 9, and my father has spent the last 10 years turning everything she loved into something he could use. She looked up. I don't want to be a person who watched it happen one more time and said nothing. The silence between them was the particular kind that exists between two women who understand each other's grief without needing to narrate it. How much time do I have? Clara said. He said tonight, Eliza said. I don't know exactly when. Clara stood. Thank you, she said. I mean that. Eliza stood too and straightened, and there was something in the straightening that looked like relief, the posture of someone who has put down something heavy. I hope the hearing goes right, she said. I genuinely do. She left. Clara stood in the middle of the front room for exactly 10 seconds doing the math. Then she went to find Ethan. I was in the kitchen where she'd left him, and he read her face before she said a word. "What happened?" he said. She told him. All of it. Eliza Harding, the false complaint, the timeline. His expression did the thing it did when he was receiving serious information, went very still, very focused, processing without reaction, until he had the whole picture. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He's going to use you to get to me," he said. "He's going to try," she said. "Clara." He said her name with a weight that meant he was about to say something he'd been holding. "This started because you asked me a question on a bridge. You didn't come here looking for trouble. You didn't come here looking for a fight." He looked at her steadily. "And I have let you walk deeper into mine every week." "We've had this conversation," she said. "I need to say it again," he said. "If that complaint gets filed and your name is in a civil action, it follows you. Even if it's thrown out. Even if it's false. A woman alone, no family. Something like that attached to your name can close doors that should be open to you." "Ethan." "I'm asking you," he said to step back. "Let Aldridge and Henderson and Garrity handle the hearing. You've done more than—" "No," she said. He stopped. "No," she said again, steady and clear. "I know what you're doing, and I understand why you're doing it, and the answer is no." She held his gaze. "Harding's complaint is false. I know every detail of that Kansas sale, and there is nothing in it that can be used against me in a legitimate proceeding. If Prescott files it, Aldridge will know within an hour, and he can respond." She paused. "What I need you to do is stop trying to protect me from a fight I've already chosen, and focus on what we do in the next 12 hours. He looked at her for a long time. "You're the most stubborn person I've ever met," he said. "Yes," she said. "What are we going to do about Harding's complaint?" He took a breath. "Let it out. We need to get ahead of it. If Aldridge knows before Prescott files, he can have a response ready." "I'll write to him tonight," she said. "Express courier to Pueblo. Bergstrom's older boy rides fast. He's done it before." "I'll pay for the courier," Ethan said. "You'll do no such thing," she said. "I have $8 saved, and this is what they're for." He opened his mouth. She looked at him. He closed it. "Write the letter," he said. She wrote it at the kitchen table in 20 minutes, fast and precise. The details of the Kansas sale, the date, the acreage, the water rights, as explicitly stated in the original document, the name of the county recorder who had filed it, the lawyer who had witnessed it. Everything Aldridge would need to immediately counter a false complaint. She sealed it, handed it to Ethan. "Can you get it to Bergstrom's boy without being seen by Prescott's men?" she asked. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has spent 3 years navigating a mountain alone. "Yes," he said. He was back in 20 minutes. "It's on its way," he said. "Then we're as ready as we're going to be," she said. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. Looked at her the way he'd been looking at her lately, openly, without the careful management of earlier months. Like a man who had decided he was done rationing something he'd been running low on for too long. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said gently. "Not tonight. Tonight we need to sleep, and tomorrow we ride to Pueblo." "I just want to say one thing," he said. She waited. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I need you to know that what you've given me, not the hearing, not the deed, not any of it. What you've given me is the first time in 3 years that I've thought about the future more than the past." He held her gaze. "I wanted to say that before tomorrow, in case tomorrow gets complicated." She looked at him for a long moment. "It's going to get complicated," she said. "I know," he said. "I still wanted to say it." "I know," she said quietly. "I heard it." They left for Pueblo before dawn. Ethan, Clara Cobb, riding guard, and Henderson and Garrity meeting them at the South Road Junction. All 5 of them moving south in the gray pre-morning, with the particular purposeful quiet of people who have somewhere to be. The ride was 4 hours, and Ethan sat his horse straight and didn't favor his side, and Clara rode beside him, and they talked about ordinary things, the cattle, the garden along the south wall of the cabin. Whether Margaret would eventually tell anyone what she actually thought about all of this. And it was the most ordinary conversation she'd had in 2 weeks, and it was the best. They reached Pueblo by late morning and went directly to Aldridge's office. Howe was waiting. He had the hatch file, the deed copies Henderson's prior transaction records, and a response to Harding's complaint already drafted. He'd received Bergstrom's letter at midnight and had worked through the early hours. Prescott filed the Harding complaint at 9 this morning, Aldridge said without preamble. The hearing judge Harmon received it before I could intercede. Clara's stomach dropped. But, Aldridge said, and something in the set of his expression meant the but was significant. Judge Harmon reviewed it and noted that the complaint was filed from a party with no representation present in this jurisdiction, with no corroborating documentation on the morning of a scheduled hearing involving the same property. He has set it aside for separate consideration and stated it will not affect today's proceedings. The room breathed. He knew what it was, Clara said. Judge Harmon is a careful man, Aldridge said. He doesn't like being used. He looked at the group. The hearing begins at 2 o'clock. Henderson, Garrity, you'll be called as witnesses. Callahan, I'll need you to confirm the deed details on record. Miss Whitmore. He paused. Your notes from the Pueblo court record, the hatch proceeding, those are the linchpin. I have them, she said. She produced the folded papers from her coat pocket. She'd carried them there since she'd written them 2 weeks ago. She set them on Aldridge's desk. He looked at them, looked at her. You've had those in your pocket this whole time. I didn't know when I'd need them, she said. Aldridge allowed himself a small expression that wasn't quite a smile, but was in that direction. Shall we go over everything? He said. They sat in Aldridge's office for 2 hours. He walked them through the order of proceedings, what each witness would be asked, what Prescott's lawyer would likely challenge, and how Aldridge would respond. Ethan sat and listened with the same focused attention he brought to everything, asking 2 questions, both precise, both exactly the right questions, and otherwise letting Aldridge work. Henderson and Garrity sat side by side and confirmed their details with the grim reliability of men who have waited too long to set something right and are not going to let nerves get in the way of finally doing it. Cobbs sat in this corner and said nothing, but his presence felt important, the witness to what had happened at the barn, if it came to that. At 1:30, they walked to the courthouse. The Pueblo District Courthouse was a limestone building that smelled of old paper and authority, and Judge Harmon's courtroom was smaller than Clara had expected. Plain benches, a high bench windows that let in the afternoon light. She sat beside Aldridge at the plaintiff's table and watched the room fill. Prescott came in with his lawyer, a tall man named Voss, well-dressed, carrying the particular confidence of a man who had won in this room before. Prescott himself looked at Ethan first, then at Clara. His expression was controlled, but something behind it had shifted since their confrontation in the Greystone Street 2 days ago. The certainty had a crack in it. Decker was not in the room. Clara noted that. Judge Harmon entered at precisely 2 o'clock. A lean man of 60 in a dark coat with the focused attention of someone who had been doing this long enough to be done with unnecessary ceremony. This proceeding concerns the title to a parcel of land in Garfield County, Colorado Territory, currently in dispute between the filed claim of Doyle Prescott and the existing deed of Ethan Callahan, Harmon said. Mr. Aldridge, you filed a challenge on grounds of fraudulent notarization. Present your case. Aldridge stood. Howe was methodical and clear. The deed first. Ethan's original survey, the tax records establishing 8 years of legitimate ownership. Then the hatch records the notary's history, the 1879 preceding the pattern. He laid each element down, like a man building something solid piece by piece. And Clara watched the judge's face and saw the particular quality of careful attention that meant the judge was following and finding the structure sound. When Aldridge presented Clara's notes from the court record, Voss stood. Objection. These are handwritten notes from an unqualified layperson reviewing a legal document. The notes accurately transcribe a matter of public record, Aldridge said. We're not asking the court to accept the notes as the record. We're asking the court to review the original record, which we have formally requested be provided to this proceeding. Harmon looked at the notes, looked at the court seal on the document Aldridge had obtained. The request for the original file is granted, he said. Clerk retrieve case, 1979, CR 104 phone from the archive. Voss sat down. Prescott leaned toward him and said something low. Aldridge called Henderson. Henderson walked to the witness chair with his hat in his hands and told his story without embellishment and without drama. What Prescott had said, what he'd threatened, the specific language about Robert's debt, the price he'd been offered, and what the land was actually worth. His voice stayed steady the whole time. Clara watched him and thought about what it must have cost him to carry this for 18 months, and what it was costing him to put it down now in a courtroom with Prescott 10 feet away. Voss cross-examined. Tried to establish that Henderson had signed freely, had consulted his own judgment. "I signed because he threatened my son," Henderson said for the third time, with the patience of a man repeating the simple truth. "That's not freely." Garrity followed. Shorter, blunter, with the clipped testimony of a man who had already decided what he was going to say and wasn't going to be moved from it. Then Aldridge called Ethan. He walked to the chair with his usual unhurried deliberateness, and Clara watched him and thought, this is the same man who stood on a bridge for 3 years. The same stillness. The same absolute refusal to be rattled. Aldridge walked him through the deed, purchased the correspondence with Greer, the tax records. Ethan answered in the direct, economical sentences of a man who knows what he owns and why. Then Voss stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Callahan," Voss said pleasantly, "you've operated this property for 8 years." "Yes," Ethan said. "Alone for most of that time." "Yes." "No family, no business partners, no witnesses to the day-to-day operations of the property." "I have tax records and 8 years of payment to the county," Ethan said. "Those are witnesses enough. And yet," Voss said, shifting slightly, "you found it necessary to engage a woman, a recent arrival to the county, with no legal standing to retrieve court documents on your behalf. Doesn't that suggest that your own position in this matter was insufficient to support?" "Miss Whitmore retrieved a public record," Ethan said. "From a public archive. Any person in this territory has the right to read a public record. That she chose to read that one speaks to her thoroughness, not to any weakness in my position." Voss shifted. "And the nature of your relationship with Miss Whitmore?" "Is not relevant to the deed," Ethan said. "The court might consider—" "Mr. Voss," Judge Harmon said without looking up from the document he was reviewing. "The deed and the notary history are before this court. The personal associations of the parties are not. Move on." Voss moved on. But the question had been asked, and Clara felt it in the room, felt the attention of every person in the benches turning briefly toward her, and she looked straight ahead and kept her hands still in her lap. The original Hatch file arrived from the archive 20 minutes into Voss's cross-examination. Harmon called a brief recess to review it. When he returned, his expression had not changed, but the quality of his attention had. He read the marginal note, the one about the witness recantation, the $200 deposit allowed to the courtroom. Prescott's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, that notation is unsigned and unverified. It is in a county court file," Harmon said, "maintained by this court's archive, which means it is a matter of record whether or not it is signed." He set the file down. "Mr. Voss, does your client wish to speak to the selection of Cornelius Hatch as the notary on the filing in question?" Voss turned to Prescott. The conversation was quiet and brief. "My client selected Mr. Hatch based on his current licensure," Voss said. "My client was not aware of the 1879 proceeding." "Hatch's license should have been revoked in 1879, Aldridge said. "If it was not, that is a failure of the licensing authority, but it does not make the pattern of his use any less significant." Harmon looked at both tables for a moment. Then he said, "I am going to take a 30-minute recess before issuing my ruling. Both parties will remain available." He left. The room exhaled. Ethan came back to the table and sat beside Clara, and without looking at her, he said very quietly, "Well, I don't know," she said, equally quiet. "But Harmon read that note 3 times. "I saw," he said. They sat in the courthouse and waited, and Clara thought about the last month, the bridge, the cornbread, the document box under the floorboard, the ride to Pueblo in the dark, the knife wound, the pre-dawn street. Eliza Prescott, putting down something heavy, and she thought whatever happens in the next 30 minutes, none of that becomes less real. None of it goes back. Ethan's hand resting on the table between them moved slightly, just slightly, so that the edge of it rested against hers. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him. But she turned her hand just barely so that the contact was mutual. They waited. Harmon returned in 28 minutes. He sat. He looked at both tables with the level attention of a man who has made a decision and is comfortable with it. The deed presented by Ethan Callahan, he said, is legitimate. The survey marks the original filing, the tax record, and the correspondence establishing the chain of title are consistent and uncontradicted. He paused. The filing presented by Doyle Prescott bears the notarization of Cornelius Hatch, whose conduct in 1879 was sufficient to warrant revocation of his license, a revocation that did not occur, and for which this court has no authority to retroactively assign responsibility. However, he looked at Prescott directly. The use of a notary with a documented history of fraudulent practice in a filing that contradicts an established deed, combined with testimony from two separate parties regarding similar patterns of conduct by the filing party, is sufficient for this court to find the Prescott filing fraudulent in origin and invalid. The courtroom was very still. The Prescott claim is dismissed, Harmon said. The Callahan deed stands as the valid title to the property in question. The attachment order issued by Judge Waverly is hereby voided on grounds of jurisdictional conflict, and this court will be referring that matter to the territorial court in Denver for review of the circumstances under which it was issued. He looked at Voss. I would suggest your client consult a very good lawyer about what happens next. He stood. Everyone stood. And then it was over. Henderson shook Ethan's hand, first hard and long, and said nothing, because nothing was the right thing. Garrity clapped him once on the shoulder and turned away, because Garrity wasn't a man who prolonged moments. Aldridge gathered his papers with the efficient satisfaction of a man who had done the thing he set out to do. Prescott left without looking at anyone, and Voss followed, and the room emptied around them until it was just Ethan and Clara at the plaintiff's table. Ethan sat for a moment after everyone was gone. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at the deed that Aldridge had slid in front of him before leaving his deed certified by the court, stamped with Harmon's seal. He picked it up, looked at it for a long time. 8 years, he said. It's yours, Clara said. It was always yours. He set it down, looked at her. It doesn't feel the way I expected, he said. How does it feel? He thought about it. Like the end of something. Which I know is wrong, it's the opposite. But it's been the fight for so long that winning it feels... He stopped. Like now you have to figure out what comes after, she said. Yes, he said. Exactly that. She looked at him. What do you want to come after? He held her gaze with those gray eyes level open, no longer careful, no longer managing what showed through them. I want you to come up the mountain, he said. Not to bring documents, not for a strategy. I want you to come up and see what I've built and have coffee in the kitchen in the morning, and... He stopped. I want you to see Anna's garden. I want to show it to you properly, not just from the outside. She felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been held for a long time without her quite realizing how much tension it took to hold it. I want that too, she said. I know it's not simple, he said. I know what I carry. I know it's not a light thing to walk toward. Ethan, she said. I walked toward it months ago, on a Friday afternoon when I had no good reason to. He looked at her. I know, he said. I've been trying to be worth that since. You already were, she said. That's why I walked. The courtroom was empty around them, and the afternoon light came through the windows and sat on the old wooden table, and on the deed with its fresh court stamp, and on the hands of two people who had come a long way from a bridge in Greystone on a Friday afternoon in July. Ethan reached across and took her hand. Not the edge of the table half-contact of the last hour, but fully deliberately the way a man does something he's been deciding to do for a long time and has finally decided. She held on. We should find the others, she said after a while. Henderson will want to start back before dark. Yes, he said. He didn't let go. Ethan. One more minute, he said. She looked at him, at this man who had stood on a bridge for 3 years, keeping faith with someone gone who had brought her cornbread, who had ridden down from the mountain in the dark because he needed to know she was safe, who had said, "I'm not the same man I was that Friday," with the particular honesty of someone who doesn't say things he doesn't mean. One more minute, she agreed. Outside, Cobb was waiting with the horses. Henderson and Garrity were already mounted, patient with the patience of men who understood that some minutes were different from other minutes and deserved the space they took. The deed was in Ethan's coat pocket, his hand was in Clara's, and somewhere north of Pueblo, on a ridge above the Greystone Valley, 400 acres of mountain land and water rights waited under the summer sky for the man who had built them and the woman who had helped him hold them. Both of them carrying between them the particular weight of everything that had happened, and the particular lightness of knowing now what came next. They went out into the afternoon together, and they didn't let go. The ride back to Greystone was 4 hours, and they made it in mostly good silence, the kind that comes after something large has finished, and the people who lived through it are still taking stock of themselves. Henderson rode ahead with Garrity. The two of them talking in the low, steady tones of men who had put something right and were figuring out how that felt. Cobb rode behind, doing the young man's version of giving people space, which mostly involved looking at everything on both sides of the road with exaggerated interest. Ethan and Clara rode side by side in the middle, and the road was wide enough for it, and neither of them felt the need to fill the hours with words they hadn't sorted out yet. Once around the halfway point, Ethan said, "Your side of the boarding house faces south." "It does," she said. "You can see the mountain trail from that window." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "You watched me come down every Friday from that window before you ever walked to the bridge." "I did," she said. "For how long before you came?" "4 weeks," she said. "I told you that." "I know," he said. "I just wanted to hear it again." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. "Because it means you decided," he said. "You didn't just happen to be near the bridge. You watched, and you thought about it, and you decided." He held her gaze briefly before looking back at the road. "I like knowing that." She was quiet for a moment. "What did you think," she said, "the first time I spoke to you?" He considered it. "I thought you were going to ask me to move along," he said. "That's what people generally wanted. For me to finish whatever I was doing and not be a curiosity anymore. And when I asked who you were waiting for, I thought..." He stopped. "I thought it was the first honest question anyone had asked me in 3 years." He paused. "And I didn't know what to do with it." "You answered it," she said. "Eventually," he said. "You gave me enough quiet to find the answer." She looked at the road ahead. "That's all it ever takes sometimes," she said. "Just enough quiet." He nodded once, slow, the way he confirmed things that mattered. And they rode the rest of the way without speaking, and it was exactly enough. They reached Greystone as the sun was going low, painting everything the color of cooling iron. Henderson and Garrity split off at the North Junction with handshakes all around, and Cobb led the horses to Bergstrom's livery. And then it was just Ethan and Clara standing in front of Margaret's boarding house, with the day's dust on them, and the deed in Ethan's pocket, and everything that had happened in the last month sitting between them, like furniture that needed to be arranged. Margaret opened the door before either of them knocked. She looked at their faces, read them the way she read everything efficiently, without asking for more than was offered. "Come in," she said. "Supper's been ready an hour." They came in. Gerald was at his corner. He looked up from his plate, looked at Ethan, looked at Clara, looked back at his plate. "Stayed for supper, did he?" Gerald said to no one in particular. "Gerald," Margaret said. "I'm just noting it," Gerald said mildly. "First time in the history of this establishment that Ethan Callahans sat at this table for more than coffee." "The first of many things today," Clara said, and sat down, and didn't elaborate, and the particular quality of how she said it made Margaret press her lips together to contain something that wasn't quite a smile. Ethan sat. He ate. He answered Gerald's questions about the hearing with the directness of a man who had no interest in dramatizing what had already been dramatic enough, and Gerald listened with the attention of an old man who understood that some stories didn't need embellishment because the facts were sufficient. Prescott, Gerald said at one point. He'll go after something else. Probably, Ethan said. But not here, and not this. He didn't say it with satisfaction, just as a statement of what was true. Good enough, Gerald said, and went back to his supper. After the meal, Ethan helped Clara clear the table, which caused Margaret to go very still for a moment, in the way of a woman recalibrating an understanding she'd held for a while. At the door he stopped. Sunday, he said to Clara. Come up Sunday. I'll cook. She raised an eyebrow. You'll cook. I baked you cornbread, he said. I can cook. The cornbread was decent, she said. The cornbread was good, he said with the mild certainty of a man who knows what he made. She almost smiled. Sunday, she said. He put on his hat. Clara, he said. I know, she said. He looked at her for a moment, and the thing she saw in his face now was different from anything she'd seen there before. Not the careful management of earlier months, not the controlled stillness of the bridge. Something open. Something that had decided to stop being careful about being seen. He tipped his hat. He left. She stood in the doorway and listened to the Appaloosa's hooves moving up the street toward the mountain trail, and Margaret came to stand beside her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Sunday, Margaret said. Yes, Clara said. I'll need you back by Monday morning, Margaret said. Breakfast doesn't cook itself. I'll be back Monday morning, Clara said. Good, said Margaret, and went inside, and that was the end of it. Saturday passed the way. Saturdays do, when you're waiting for Sunday too slow and too fast at once, and every ordinary task carrying more weight than it should, because the mind keeps slipping ahead to the thing it's actually thinking about. Clara cleaned the kitchen. She helped Margaret with the mending she'd let fall behind. She went to Delphine's and told her everything, and Delphine listened to the whole account, and when Clara was done, she said, Harmon referred the attachment to Denver, you said. Yes, Clara said. That means Prescott's judge is going to have to explain himself to the territorial court, Delphine said. That's what Aldridge thinks. Delphine sat back with the particular satisfaction of someone who has watched a long game reach its right ending. Good, she said. Prescott will leave the valley. He won't stay somewhere he's lost. Men like him never do. They go find somewhere new to try it. She looked at Clara. The Henderson land. The Garrity place. Prescott will have to liquidate what he bought here if Denver gets involved. Aldridge said the same thing, Clara said. He said there may be a process to revisit those sales. Delphine's expression did something complicated. Tom Henderson's boy has been in Denver for 18 months, thinking his father lost everything because of a debt, she said. If that land comes back. I know, Clara said. Delphine looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked up. You came here with $11 and a carpet bag, she said. And you've spent 2 months turning this valley right side up. I asked a question on a bridge, Clara said. Everything else followed from that. That's not nothing, Delphine said. Asking the right question at the right time, that's not nothing at all. Sunday morning. Clara packed a small bag, nothing much, a change of clothes, the book she'd been trying to read for 3 weeks, and told Margaret she'd be back by first light Monday. Margaret handed her a cloth bundle without being asked. Pie, she said. Apple. Don't tell him I made it, tell him you made it. Clara took the bundle. Why? Because I have a reputation to maintain, Margaret said, and that reputation does not include baking pies for mountain cowboys, however deserving they may be. I'll tell him I made it, Clara said. Good girl, said Margaret, and went back to the kitchen. The trail up to Ethan's Ridge was familiar to her now, in a way that had happened without her noticing the way you learn a road when you've traveled it with enough intention. She knew where it steepened, knew the place where the pines thinned, and you could see the whole valley below, knew the fence line that meant you were nearly there. She knew the house. She came over the rise and saw it in the Sunday morning light, and Ethan was on the porch not waiting exactly, just present the way he was present at things that mattered. He had coffee in his hand. He watched her come the whole way. She tied the mare and came up the porch steps. He looked at the bundle in her hand. I made you a pie, she said. Something moved in his expression. You made me a pie. Apple, she said. Don't examine it too closely. I took it from her with both hands, with the particular care of a man receiving something he intends to take seriously. Thank you, he said, and meant it for more than the pie, and she knew that. You said you'd cook, she said. Come inside, he said. The kitchen was clean in the way of a man who lived alone, and had learned that disorder created problems he didn't need. There was bacon already done, and eggs on the pan and bread that he'd baked that morning. She could tell by the warmth of it when he set the board on the table. She sat. He cooked. She watched him move in his own kitchen and thought about the difference between watching someone in their own space and watching them everywhere else. How it told you things about who they actually were when nothing was being performed. He was competent and unhurried, and he cooked the eggs the way she'd have cooked them, which she noticed and didn't comment on. He set the plate in front of her and sat across, and they ate, and it was the most natural thing she'd done in longer than she could account for. How's your side? She asked. Healing, he said. Does it hurt? Yes, he said. Less than yesterday. You need to go back to Fenner next week. I know, he said. You won't go unless someone tells you to. Probably not, he said. I'm telling you to, she said. He looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. She picked up her coffee. You're very agreeable this morning. I'm in a good mood, he said. Why? He looked at her across the table. Because you're sitting in my kitchen, he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. She held his gaze. That's a good reason, she said. After breakfast, he took her to the garden. Not in a formal way, he just said, "Come here," and led her around the side of the house to the south wall, and they stood in front of it together. It was more than she'd seen from the outside. Someone had put real thought into it, the layout, the choices, what went where. Tomatoes and kitchen herbs at the near end. Then flowers that Clara didn't know the names of, but that had clearly been planted for no reason, except that they were beautiful, and along the wall itself, climbing up the old wood, a vine that was still producing small white flowers, even this late in the summer. She planted all of it, Clara said. Most of it, Ethan said. The vine was here already. She trained it up the wall. He stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at it the way he looked at the creek from the bridge, completely without hurry. I don't know what half of it is. I've just watered it. That's enough, Clara said. That's what kept it. He looked at her. I want to tell you something, he said, about Anna. And I want to tell you now, before everything else, because I think it matters that you hear it. Tell me, she said. He was quiet for a moment, finding the words the way he always found words, not quickly, but right. She was the best thing that had happened to me up to that point, he said. And when she died, I decided, not consciously, but I decided that the best thing had already happened. That whatever came after was just time. He looked at the garden. That's why I went to the bridge, not just to remember her, to stay in the place where the best thing had been, because I didn't believe there was another one coming. Clara stood very still. And then you asked me a question, he said, that nobody had thought to ask, and it turned out, he stopped, looked at her directly. It turned out I was wrong, about the best thing having already happened. She felt something shift in her chest, slow and tectonic, the movement of something that had been in place for a long time, deciding to settle differently. Ethan, she said. I'm not finished, he said gently. She waited. Anna would have liked you, he said. I know that's a strange thing to say, and I've thought about whether to say it for weeks. But she would have. The way you're steady. The way you don't waste things, not words, not effort, not time. He paused. She was like that. And I think she'd have looked at what you've done for this place and for me, and she'd have said, good. That's good. He held Clara's gaze. I needed you to know that, because I don't want you to ever think you're standing in someone else's place here. You're not. This is your place, if you want it. The garden grew quiet around them. The vine on the wall moved slightly in the summer air. I want it, Clara said. He nodded once, the way he confirmed things that mattered. Then he reached out and took her hand, the same way he'd taken it in the courthouse, fully deliberately. and they stood in Anna's garden in the Sunday morning and let the quiet hold them for a while. They spent the day, the way people spend days when they've stopped being careful around each other and started being themselves. She found a loose board on the porch and told him about it. He fixed it in 20 minutes with tools he knew exactly where to find, and she sat on the porch steps and watched, and they talked about the cattle, about the east wall of the barn that still needed rebuilding, about whether Cobb was going to stay on now that things had settled. "He'll stay," Ethan said, driving the last nail. "He just needed to know I was worth staying for." "Everyone needs to know that," Clara said. He looked at her over his shoulder. "Is that why you came to the bridge?" he said. "To find out if I was worth it." She thought about it honestly. "I came to the bridge because I couldn't stop thinking about a man who did something so faithful and so private every week that nobody dared ask him why," she said. "And I needed to know if the reason was as real as it looked." "Was it?" he said. "More real," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he put the hammer down and came to sit beside her on the steps, and they sat in the afternoon heat with their shoulders touching and didn't move for a long time. Somewhere in the middle of the afternoon the twist came. Not from Prescott. Not from any legal quarter. It came from Cobb, who rode up the trail at a pace that meant something and arrived at the fence line calling for Ethan before he'd fully stopped the horse. Ethan was on his feet before Cobb reached the porch. "What?" he said. Cobb caught his breath. "Decker," he said. "He came back into Greystone this morning, not hiding, walking right down the main street. He went to the post office and sent a telegraph." "To who?" Clara said, standing. "That's what Bergstrom's boy found out," Cobb said. "He knows the telegraph clerk. Decker sent it to a federal marshal in Denver, named himself as a witness." He paused, and the pause carried something. "In a fraud proceeding. Against Prescott." The porch went very still. "Decker turned," Ethan said. "He didn't just turn," Cobb said. "The telegraph clerk told Bergstrom's boy what it said. Decker's offering testimony about 3 other properties Prescott took in the last 4 years. Properties outside this county. He's got names, dates, the same notary, all of it." Cobb looked at them both. He said, and this is what the clerk told it. He said Prescott promised him a share of Callahan's water rights when the land transferred. When the hearing went against Prescott, Decker didn't get paid. "And Decker doesn't work for free," Clara said. "Apparently not," Cobb said. Ethan stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets and looked at the middle distance, the way he looked at things he was processing. "Prescott didn't just lose Callahan's land," he said slowly. "He lost Decker's loyalty, and Decker knows everything." "Every property," Clara said. "Every notary. Every threat." "The territorial court in Denver," Ethan said, "is going to have more than they bargained for." The 3 of them stood in the afternoon sun and let the shape of it settle. Then Cobb said, "There's something else." "Say it," Ethan said. "Eliza Prescott left this morning," Cobb said. "Took the southbound wagon before dawn. She left a letter at Margaret's." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope addressed in a careful hand to Clara Whitmore. Clara took it. She opened it. It was short. 3 sentences. "I hope the garden grows well. I hope you understand why I couldn't stay. Some things you have to leave before they become the only thing people see in you. Take care of what you've built." It was signed simply E. Clara folded it, held it for the moment. "She left before her father did," she said. "Yes," Cobb said. "Good," she said. "Good for her." She put the letter in her pocket. Ethan looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed between them that didn't need language, the recognition mutual and complete, that the thing they'd been fighting for weeks was now genuinely over, and that what came next was actually finally theirs to decide. "Cobb," Ethan said without looking away from Clara. "Go check the east fence. Make sure everything held." Cobb looked between them, read the situation with the quick perception of youth and said, "Yes, sir," and was gone before the words were out. They stood on the porch in the late afternoon. "Prescott's going to Denver," Ethan said, "whether he knows it yet or not." "He'll know by tonight," Clara said. "Decker's testimony is in federal hands now. There's nothing Prescott can do about it without making it worse." "Henderson gets his land back," Ethan said. Garrity too, maybe. Maybe, she said. It'll take time, but yes. He was quiet for a moment. When you wrote to Aldridge, he said. That very first letter before you'd told me before any of this, what made you do it? She thought about it. You said the word anyone, she said. When you were talking about not having anyone who would stand witness. You said it like it was just a fact, like you'd accepted it as permanent. She paused. I couldn't let it be permanent. He looked at her. That's all, he said. That's everything, she said. He reached out and tucked the loose strand of hair back from her face, the same gesture he'd made at the barn in the dark, with smoke in the air and everything uncertain. But now it was daylight, and nothing was uncertain, and he let his hand stay for a moment along her face, and she leaned into it slightly, and that was the whole conversation they needed. Come inside, he said. The pie. Margaret made it, she said. He stopped, looked at her. You said you made it, he said. I lied, she said. She told me to. The laugh that came out of him was full and real and completely unguarded. The biggest laugh she'd heard from him. The kind that had been in there for years behind the stillness. And she thought, there it is. There's the man. The cornbread was better, he said when he'd recovered. Your cornbread was decent, she said. Good, he said firmly. Fine, she said. Good. They went inside. The following Friday came, the way Fridays always had in Greystone. Ordinary on the surface, the week's business, wrapping up the saloon, getting its weekly delivery, Harlan Briggs doing his accounts. At 2 o'clock, Ethan Callahan rode down from the mountain. The town looked up the way it always had out of long habit, and then looked again because something was different. He wasn't alone. Clara rode beside him on the gray mare, matching his pace, and they came down the main street together and turned south toward the bridge, and tied their horses at the post, and walked to the south railing side by side. Delphine Shorter from her front step watched them go, and did not pretend she wasn't watching. Gerald, who happened to be walking back from the post office, stopped and looked, and then continued walking with the satisfied expression of a man whose long-held private theory has been publicly confirmed. Margaret from her front window watched for exactly the time it took her to satisfy herself that what she was seeing was what she thought it was, and then went back to her work with the brisk energy of a woman who has arranged things to her satisfaction. Ethan and Clara stood at the south railing and looked downstream. The creek ran cold below them. The summer heat was beginning to ease at the edges. Fall was still weeks away, but you could feel the early suggestion of it in the mornings. Now the way the light came in at a slightly different angle. Does it feel different? Clara asked. Being here. He thought about it. Yes, he said. And no. Tell me, she said. It still feels like her, he said. It still feels like that particular Friday feeling of coming here and being in both times. The old one and the current one. He looked at the water. But the current one is louder now. It used to be the old one that was louder. Clara stood quietly beside him. Is that all right? She asked. That it still feels like her. He looked at her. Yes, he said. It should. It will for a long time. Maybe always. He paused. That doesn't mean there isn't room for this. For you. There is. There's more room than I thought. She nodded. She would have liked this, he said. Standing here with someone. She was always telling me I was too much alone. Smart woman, Clara said for the second time. Yes, he said for the second time. And then quieter. She was right. They stood in the Friday afternoon, and the creek ran, and the town went about its business around them, and the mountain rose up behind them, and the summer moved toward fall in its own good time. I've been thinking, Clara said. About what? The east wall of the barn, she said. You'll need help rebuilding it before the weather turns. More than Cobb. I've been thinking the same thing, he said. Henderson would help, she said. And Garrity. And I think if you asked Bergstrom's boy properly, he'd work for fair wages and consider it an education. Ethan smiled fully without reservation, the smile she'd been watching find its way to the surface for months. You've already planned it, he said. I've been thinking about it, she said. It's different. Clara, he said. Yes, she said. Move up to the mountain, he said. She turned to look at him. Not for the barn, he said. Not for the garden or the cooking or any practical reason. He held her gaze with those gray eyes open and direct and carrying everything he meant exactly. Because you belong there. Because I built that place for a life I thought was finished, and it turns out it wasn't finished, it was just waiting. He paused. And because every Friday for 3 years I came down to stand at this bridge, and I never once thought the reason I kept coming might be that the person I was waiting for hadn't arrived yet. The creek ran below them. The summer air held them both. Clara looked at him for a long time. I need to give Margaret proper notice, she said. He almost laughed. How much notice? 2 weeks, she said. She'll need to find someone for the kitchen. 2 weeks, he agreed. And I'll want to plant something of my own in the garden, she said. Beside what's already there. Not instead of. Beside. I know the difference, he said. I know you do, she said. That's why I said it. He reached out and took her hand at the railing. The same railing where he had stood for 3 years alone. The same creek. The same Friday light. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, she said. And they stood there together until the 20 minutes were long past, and neither of them counted it or cared, because the counting had stopped being the point, and the standing there together had taken its place. And that was the whole difference between waiting and belonging. Below them, Larimer. Creek ran cold and clear off the high country, the way it had run every summer of Ethan Callahan's memory, and would run every summer after, patient and constant and indifferent to the particular sorrows and joys of the people who stood above it. But the people above it were not indifferent to each other. And that in the end was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.